Chapter 240, Trying Your Luck. Good at concocting medicine, treating illnesses, and growing quite a few medicinal herbs in the sewers. Is he an apothecary? I wonder if he's a member of the life school of thought or a believer of Mother Earth. Of course, it's more likely for him to be unaffiliated. Klein listened thoughtfully but didn't speak out carelessly. In the Lone Kingdom, due to the Church of the Lord of Storms rejecting the eternal blazing sun and the God of knowledge and wisdom, while the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of the God of Combat were irreconcilable, as a result of this, among the foreign religions, only the Church of Mother Earth had obtained the right to preach, but under the tacit suppression from the three churches. They only had a few churches with very few believers, to the point that they didn't even need to form a team of Beyonders. And even if they did, they wouldn't be recognized by the government and couldn't cooperate with the police department. They would be considered as vigilantes. According to the confidential information of the Nighthawks, the Church of Mother Earth had two sequence paths in its control, planter and apothecary. However, the latter was apparently incomplete. The suspected apothecary didn't have his hood on. He revealed a black iron mask on his face, but it only covered the part above the bridge of his nose, making the quivering fat on his cheeks appear to stand out. I repeat, I need someone to clean up the newly appeared beast in the sewers. I only need the area around Backlund Bridge cleaned up. Payment will be with 4 bottles of my precious medicine. 2 of them can effectively stop bleeding and stimulate the healing of wounds. Trust me, this is better than going to the clinic to do a suture operation, and it's effective for 6 months. The man suspected to be an apothecary stated his requirements and corresponding conditions. He suddenly let out a soft laugh and continued to describe the case. The other 2 bottles can last 1.5 months, and can allow a man to find the urges from back when he was 17 or 18 years old and become a Beyonder on the bed. Hee, you know what I mean. Even if it exceeds the use-by date, it can still produce effects, but it will also spread throughout the body. The user will become abnormally violent and their strength, speed, and agility will greatly increase before exhaustion kicks in half an hour later. Why does he look like those old military doctors who plaster their tiny advertisements everywhere? And shamelessly promoting the effects of his expired drugs. Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. Seeing the silent room after he said his piece, the suspected apothecary could only grit his teeth and say, I'll add 30 pounds on top of my 4 precious bottles of medicine. Finally, a man sitting somewhere along the periphery of the couches spoke up. He surveyed the area and said in a deep voice, I accept this commission. You should pay in advance with 2 bottles of medicine, 1 of each kind. Mr. Eye of Wisdom will bear witness. No problem, said an elder seated on a single sofa with a nod. The lines on his cheeks were deep, his skin a little shriveled, and his voice had an ancient quality to it, so Klein judged him to be an elderly gentleman. All right. The suspected apothecary heaved a sigh of relief. After the conclusion of this transaction, the gathering seemed to turn more lively. Soon, a woman with her face completely covered by a hood said, I want to sell 2 weapons. Weapons? Klein adjusted his posture and became more focused. Since he was temporarily unable to advance, he could only increase his strength by using external items. One of them is an inscribed steel sword. It was smithied by the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sunday. It comes with purifying and evil warding effects. It's the nemesis of water ghosts, wraiths, zombies, and other undead creatures. It can still be used for another 3 years. Of course, its sharpness is enough to kill. The woman's voice fluctuated in volume, a clear attempt to hide her characteristics. 500 pounds or the sequence 8 potion, barbarian, and it will be yours. How expensive? For me, there's no reason I must have it. If I were to encounter an undead that I'm currently unable to deal with, blowing the whistle is the best solution. Even without Mr. Azek, the messenger alone should be able to intimidate many undead creatures. Klein shook his head and listened to the lady's introduction of the second weapon. Meat cleaver, with exquisite mechanical structure. It can be transformed, making it easy to carry. This is a combat weapon, made by an outstanding craftsman. It's rarely seen, and will cost £25. There sure is a huge difference in pricing between weapons with Beyonder effects and those without. Klein watched from the sidelines until the steel sword was bought by a sullen gentleman in another corner, and the meat cleaver became part of Mr. Eye of Wisdom's collection. There were successes and failures in the few deals that followed. The only thing that tempted Klein was a fortune accessory, a Beyonder item that could make a person's luck with fortune rise for 3 months. However, this wasn't his main goal, and the price wasn't that great. Seeing that the atmosphere had turned silent once again, he slowly exhaled and said in a suppressed voice, "I want to sell something." After attracting everyone's attention, he took out an iron cigarette case and pushed out the crimson Beyonder characteristic which resembled jelly. Without needing to organizing his words, he introduced it with something he had already prepared ahead of time. "This is something I obtained from a corpse. I'm not sure what use it has, it's just that I find it very magical. Maybe some of you know what this is." Klein deliberately didn't mention that this was a Beyonder characteristic, nor did he mention that the crimson jelly in his hand could replace the main ingredient of the hunter potion. This involved the law of Beyonder characteristics' indestructibility, and he didn't want to benefit the members of this Beyonder gathering with this knowledge. In addition to this, Klein had the intention of probing to see if anyone there knew the law of Beyonder characteristics' indestructibility. Such a person would definitely be stronger than the rest, or perhaps someone with a powerful background, making them suitable as a bodyguard. At the same time, he continued to disguise himself as an ordinary person who didn't know much about the Beyonder community. Although the members of the gathering couldn't see his appearance through the iron mask, Kasper's Kalinin knew what he looked like, and quite a few people in the room probably knew Kasper's. Being careful and prudent were the two things Klein had emphasized to himself before leaving home today. Gazes examined the crimson object in his hand, but Klein wasn't a spectator and couldn't tell what they meant. After more than 10 seconds, no one spoke. The room was as quiet as a cemetery. At this moment, the old gentleman sitting on the sofa, Mr. Eye of Wisdom, coughed and said, "I have a rough idea of what it is and what it does, but knowledge needs to be exchanged with something in return. I'll pay £400, believe me, it's a perfectly fair price. Of course, you have the right to refuse. The main ingredients of sequence 9 potions are about £150 to £200. 2 are needed, and they add up to about £400. The offer is very reasonable." This old gentleman with the code name Eye of Wisdom seems to recognize that this belongs to the hunter sequence. He had no need for divination, and he was able to recognize it immediately. Could it be the sequence 7 of the sequencer's pathway, appraiser? Klein thought for a moment and said, "Deal. However, sir, you don't need to rush to pay. I still have another request." "What request?" Eye of Wisdom asked in an old voice. Klein pondered and said, "The thing is, I offended someone. According to your circle, he should be sequence 6 or maybe 5. I wish to hire a bodyguard. Sequence 6, maybe sequence 5. Why don't you just die quietly? If we reached that level, why would we be attending such a small gathering?" the suspected apothecary blurted out with a bit of a sneer in his astonishment. Although the other members of the party didn't say anything, from the looks of it, no one planned on accepting the request. Their thoughts were similar to those of the suspected apothecary. Eye of Wisdom chuckled and said, "Maybe you don't know our circle well enough. People at sequence 6 or sequence 5 are very, very powerful and terrifying people. Yes, there have been many cases of a lot of sequence 8 and sequence 9 Beyonders killing someone that strong, but those are events that are still very hard to replicate. I think no one here is willing to take such a huge risk to protect you. If you're certain that the other party is only sequence 6 and doesn't have any mystical items, there might be someone who will want to accept the challenge this mission entails." "Well, I'm not sure," Klein shrugged and said, "then I'll have to try to save myself. What can I get for £400? The mystical item you were talking about?" "Believe me, a mystical item worth £400 certainly won't be able to deal with your enemy, and it will even bring you more danger. I suggest that you apologize to him. Sincerely apologize, and perhaps £400 will be enough to buy his understanding, Eye of Wisdom said sincerely. Frankly, I've thought about it, but I don't think they'll accept it. Klein was about to answer when the man who had accepted the task of cleaning the sewer beast suddenly laughed. Maybe, you can try your luck. I have a mystical item here that I can sell you for £400. It can let you hear the voice of a great being. If you're lucky and can decipher some useful information, you'll become very powerful, and it will no longer be difficult for you to protect yourself. Well, if you're unlucky and end up deciphering a curse, or fail to decipher it, then you'll be hurt, or even end up dying. Do you want to take the gamble? Before he could finish his sentence, Eye of Wisdom growled, Black Snake, don't mention that ominous item of yours. Black Snake laughed and said, I'm not lying, I'm not violating the rules here either. I told him about the advantages and disadvantages and left him to make his own choice. The probability of getting useful information is approximately 10%, do you want to take the gamble? The Russian roulette of the Beyonder world. Hearing the voice of a great being. Is this the Aurora Order's listener? An item left behind after a listener lost control? Klein looked at Black Snake, that he suspected to be a member of the Aurora Order, and made many connections. Perhaps I can bet on it. No, I can't call it a bet, because I'll bring this item to the world above the gray fog before using it. I can already bring real objects there. This way, I can avoid most of the danger. However, this is only an item left behind by a Sequence 8 Beyonder. The corresponding benefit might not be that good. £400 isn't cheap. As his thoughts raced through his mind, Klein nodded solemnly and said, Deal. Chapter 241, Language of Foulness. There was only a single candle that illuminated the room. The atmosphere in the living room was so silent that it was as if everything had frozen. A few seconds later, the suspected apothecary finally muttered, Why don't you leave an address? That way, I can get something out of your body. He looks like he's cursing me, but he's actually persuading me otherwise. Klein pretended not to understand and said to Black Snake, I don't have any chance of survival if I don't gamble. There'll be that sliver of hope if I gamble on it. I won't sit back and wait for death. Hearing this, Eye of Wisdom, who was about to say something, shut his mouth because he couldn't offer any other hope. I really admire your character. Black Snake laughed. I also admire you. In the past, I had quite a few friends who had such characters. Now, I visit their tombstones every year and place a bunch of flowers there, the suspected apothecary mused in a mocking but actually persuasive manner. He didn't care that Black Snake was a better fighter than he was. He said whatever he wanted to. Mr. Apothecary must have suffered because of his temper. Klein was secretly grateful. He handed the iron cigarette case containing the Hunter Beyonder characteristic to the attendant who brought it to Eye of Wisdom. The old gentleman counted out £400 in cash from the suitcase beside him and got the attendant to pass it on to Black Snake. Black Snake casually took a glance and said, I believe in Mr. Eye of Wisdom. He took out a small wooden box, bent down, and placed it on the ground. He pushed the box so that the object slid to Klein without going through the attendant. The moment Klein's fingers touched the surface of the box, he heard faint illusory sounds and immediately felt a strong sense of dizziness. For him, this wasn't something he couldn't handle. It wasn't even comparable to the illusory voices of Justice and company when they pray to him. After sitting up straight again, Klein carefully opened the wooden box and saw an ear inside. The ears looked real, except that the skin was dark and there were a few green areas where it had rotted. How do I use it? Klein asked. Black Snake casually replied, grasping it without gloves is the same as using it. You'd better go home and try it when you're alone. Klein didn't ask any further questions. He closed the box and put it into his pocket. He deliberately smiled bitterly and said, This makes me dizzy. After a short moment of silence, the suspected apothecary suddenly shouted, I want to buy Spring of the Elves marrow crystals, who has it? As his voice echoed in the air, no one answered. The apothecary smacked his lips and mumbled, "Seriously, there's no answer every time this is asked." "Maybe you could book a cruise to Sonia Island," Eye of Wisdom quipped. The spring of the elves was also known as the Sonia Golden Springs, and one could tell from its name where it came from. The spring of the elves was a commonly seen liquid and was an object with rich spirituality. However, the marrow crystals were considered beyonder ingredients and not easily purchasable. After that, there were a few failed transactions at the gathering. Eye of Wisdom clapped his hands and said, "Let's end it here today. According to the convention, we leave one by one, each separated by 3 minutes." Leaving one by one. Each separated by 3 minutes. This is to prevent the gathering members from being tailed and robbed. When Klein received the signal from Eye of Wisdom, he stood up and, guided by the attendant, left the activity room, and went to the door. He took off his hooded robe and handed it back to the attendant before following the path in his memories back to the back door of the Bravehearts bar. He then removed his iron mask and walked through the kitchen to see Caspers standing outside the card room, over the barking of dogs and clamoring of people. "I'm delighted that you could come back." The red-nosed elder heaved a sigh of relief, the nasty wounds on his face seemingly trembling. Klein leaned over and said in a low voice, "Are there such gatherings in the future? It seems like you didn't get what you wanted. Holy Lord of Storms, I don't think you should continue wasting your time." Caspers scanned this customer he felt worried for. "Maybe it'll take a few days. I don't know the details. Let's see if you can make it in time." Klein nodded and asked, "Is Merrick here?" "You're still trying to convince him?" "No, it will only anger him." Caspers warned him in a deep voice. "He's in the card room behind you." "No, I'm not going to convince him. I'm trying to stay as far away from him as possible so that his zombies won't go into mutiny." Klein touched Azek's copper whistle in his pocket. "I understand." He left the Bravehearts bar at once, went to the one-bedroom apartment in East Borough to relieve himself before returning to Minsk Street. Inside the card room, Merrick had gone all in and confidently flipped open his cards. He had 3 kings and a pair of 9s, and the zombie opposite him had a pair of 6s and an 8. Suddenly, the zombie took the initiative to reveal its hidden cards, a pair of 6s. This round, it won with 4 6s. The pale Merrick sat there blankly and immediately felt all the surrounding zombies coldly staring at him. A few minutes later, he staggered out the card room on shaky feet and almost collapsed at the door while his usual entourage of subordinates inside the room fell to the ground. "Don't let anyone in before dawn," Merrick ordered in a hoarse voice as he looked at the stunned Caspers. He took out a white handkerchief and wiped the corner of his mouth. The handkerchief was quickly dyed with a dark blue tint with some redness. After receiving Caspers' acknowledgement, Merrick found a chair to sit and asked for a barrel of Southville beer. He stared blankly as he drank. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein followed his usual routine of washing up and returning to his room before he drew the curtains. After waiting for over 10 minutes and confirming that there were no specks of spirituality around, he started to summon himself. He responded to himself and brought the wooden box containing the black ear into the mysterious space above the gray fog. The illusory crimson stars didn't twinkle at all as Klein sat at the seat of honor of the long ancient table and opened the wooden box. This time, he didn't hear any murmurs or feel dizzy. The boundless gray fog seemed to isolate all external sounds. Klein let out a sigh of relief. He was now much more confident with his impending attempt and much more confident about his own safety. With a thought, he blocked his own hearing and performed a few experiments to confirm the effects. "That's right." Klein nodded in satisfaction, reached out, and grabbed the black ear with signs of rot. He felt its coldness and slipperiness, but he didn't hear the voice of the great being that was described by Black Snake. Completely isolated? This won't do. It's impossible to use it alone. Klein muttered to himself, puzzled as he thought of the methods he could use to stimulate an effect. After a dozen or so seconds, he conjured a pen and paper, intending to emulate the process he used to spy on the eternal blazing sun previously. That time, I looked directly at the eternal blazing sun through the use of divine blood. This time, I'm only using the remains left behind by a listener, so it definitely isn't that dangerous. Klein wrote down a divination statement without any hesitation, the origin of this item. He took a breath, held the black ear, and leaned back as he recited the divination statement. After reciting it 7 times, his eyes darkened as he entered a deep slumber. In this blurry, shattered, and gray world, Klein saw a man struggling on the ground. He rolled, screamed, and his eyes bulged out. His body swelled like a balloon, and countless hairs on his body turned black and long. Soon after, an extremely evil and foul voice rang in Klein's ears, waking him up instantly. It was different from the ravings and howling that came from the mysterious space above the gray fog. This sound was more penetrating, more purposeful, and more active. Klein covered his ears and isolated any fallout, but the same voice echoed in his head. He saw his vessels and veins bulge out as if they had become thick squirming venomous snakes. Bang! His blood vessels burst, and his veins broke off from his body, spreading out into slippery tentacles filled with sinister patterns. The gray fog slightly swayed, making the giant's palace look like it was about to corrode. Unlike the incident with the eternal blazing sun, Klein still retained his sanity and didn't roll over on the ground. He gripped the handrail tightly and endured the pain. After a few seconds, the slightly swaying gray fog regained its calm, and the evil voice that echoed in Klein's mind completely died down. One tentacle after another fell to the ground, and his wounds began to rapidly heal. Interacting with deities is truly a dangerous matter, regardless of the method. Thankfully, I didn't face the true creator directly this time. If not, I'll have remnants of madness and signs of losing control and would affect my body in the real world. Klein weakly leaned back into his chair and silently mocked himself. This process was within his expectations, and it didn't go out of his control. The only thing that surprised him was that the true creator appeared to be slightly stronger than the eternal blazing sun. Just as Klein's thoughts were about to wander off, he saw the black ear in his palm suddenly crumbled, turning into tiny specks of black light. It has become a pure Beyonder characteristic. Amidst his confusion, he saw through the corner of his eyes that the sinister patterned tentacles were still twitching on the ground. They were the aspects of madness and loss of control that had been stripped from his body. These tentacles gradually turned transparent and were about to disappear. A flash of brilliance came to Klein's mind. He scattered the tiny black light specks in his palm at those slippery tentacles. An illusionary black gas rose up and turned into a sky that constantly streaked with lightning. The background was extremely dense and gloomy. All of this quickly disappeared from Klein's eyes. On the surface of the iron-black charm on the ground were many symbols, magic labels, sinister patterns, and twisted path numbers. Klein bent down and picked it up, with the feeling that what was sealed inside were howling maniacs. With the help of his divination techniques, he was able to barely decipher the use of this charm from its revelation. It was to let the opponent hear a terrifying roar, infecting them with madness. As for the final result, it depended on the target's ability to resist such attacks. If the target was strong, then they might benefit from it, but the price was becoming a devout believer of the true creator, and if he was weak, he would collapse on the spot, dying amidst tragic cries. I'll call it language of foulness. Klein muttered and said an incantation to activate it. Chapter 242, Bakerland. Early Tuesday morning, Klein woke up naturally and prepared 2 slices of toast, a piece of butter, a serving of bacon, and a cup of coffee before leisurely reading a newspaper while having breakfast. With the terrifying language of foulness charm, he was much more at ease. He was no longer as tense as he was before. Klein finished flipping through the Backland Bulletin, picked up the Tussock Times, and saw a news article on the second page. At 2 o'clock this morning, there was a fierce gunfight at Red Brick Alley in the East Borough. According to the police, it is suspected to be a clash between two gangs, one of which is the notorious Smanger Gang. The Smanger Gang. Red Brick Alley in the East Borough. A thought occurred to Klein as he left the dining table and found the map of Backlund. With just a glance, he noticed that Red Brick Alley wasn't far from Bacardi Street. Furthermore, Ian Wright had previously appeared at the telegraph office on Bacardi Street. Was Red Brick Alley where Ian Wright was hiding? Was the violent conflict between the military's special department and the intelligence staff of the Intis Republic? I wonder what the result will be. Klein picked up the last of the bacon, put it in his mouth, and chewed it slowly. He had informed both sides about the divination the previous morning, and they had already locked onto Ian's location that very night, which implied quite a high level of efficiency. After taking a sip of coffee, Klein put down the newspaper and fell into deep thought. Suddenly, he heard the tinkling of the doorbell. Who is it? Klein wiped his mouth with a napkin and headed for the door, puzzled. Could it be a new commission? For the past few days, I've been out and about because of the Intis ambassador. I wonder how many jobs and potential clients I've lost. It's such a waste of my advertising money. If this goes on, my finances will be stretched to the limit. Klein suddenly thought of something and opened the door. Standing outside were two ladies, one of them being Mrs. Sammer, who wore a dressing gown. She had intricate makeup on her face, making her look more beautiful than at home and nothing like she was in her 30s. The other lady wore a wide-brimmed hat with a black tartan veil, and a darker, more fluffy dress. Detective Moriarty, I have a friend who needs your help. Stellan Sammer held onto her veiled hat, but there was no hint of a smile in her blue eyes. Please come in. Klein pointed to the living room, and while he was turning around, he took the opportunity to fasten the top button of his shirt and adjusted his black vest. Stellan nodded slightly and, without another word, led the black-veiled lady into the room. She knew the place very well, and without Klein's guidance, easily found the sofa and took her seat. Klein wanted to immediately start asking, but then thought about Stellan Sammer's style of doing things, so he asked with a smile, coffee or tea? In his eyes, Mrs. Sammer was a lady who pursued a high quality of life and tried to show her superiority all the time. There's no need. The other lady took off her hat. She had good features, but the combination was disappointing. In addition, her cheekbones were too high, and she looked older than her actual age. A little anger, a little sadness, a little hesitation, a little fear. Klein read the lady's emotions. It wasn't that he suddenly possessed the abilities of a spectator, but that the lady's actions were just too obvious. Yes, neither coffee nor tea can solve the problem. Stellan imitated a position found in magazines, trying her best to appear classy. This is Mrs. Mary Gale, a shareholder of Coin Company. What would you like to entrust me with, Mrs. Gale? Klein sat down on a single-seater, leaning forward slightly and resting his arms on his thighs. Don't call me Mrs. Gale. Just call me Mary. Mary Gale pursed her lips. I wish for you to tail my husband and confirm if he has a mistress. It's best if you can obtain material evidence. As a result of the Church of the Evernight Goddess's active push for years, the Lone Kingdom was more radical in its marriage laws than the other countries, such as Faisac, Intis, and Lemberg. It stipulated that those who committed adultery had to pay a financial price for it, which meant that the adulterer would be at an absolute disadvantage during the division of property. I've heard that at least 4 out of 10 of the other private detectives are investigating extramarital affairs. I didn't expect that I would receive such a job too. Klein said thoughtfully, material evidence is not easy to obtain. I'll lend you the latest portable camera, Mary replied without any hesitation. As long as you have the evidence, I will pay you £10. If you only confirm that he has a mistress, you will only receive £3. You mean the so-called portable camera that's about 2/3 the size of my head? £10, this isn't a low price. Mr. Klein has been focusing on entrepreneurship and knew about the latest cameras. He hesitated for 2 seconds before saying, all right. But you have to provide me with detailed information about your husband and his regular activities. No problem. Mary paused for a second before gathering all her strength to say it. Thank you for your help. I hope you won't tell anyone else about this, Stellan reminded him. Hearing this, Klein immediately sighed. I'm a person who upholds confidentiality, and I often get into trouble for that. In the lobby of Count Wolf's house, men and women were dancing amid violin tunes. Audrey was carrying a glass of pale gold champagne when she accidentally bumped into the Intis Republic ambassador to Lone, Bakerland Jean Mudun. You're the most beautiful young lady I've ever met. Bakerland, with his thin face and slight stubble, pecked Audrey's white-gauzed glove with a kiss according to propriety customs. His eyes looked passionate and bold. Audrey rolled her eyes and said with a chuckle, Is this the way people from Intis talk? Yes, we are never stingy with praise for beautiful things. Bakerland chuckled. If it wasn't for the style of the Lone Kingdom, I might have called you my angel. Old pervert. Audrey maintained her graceful smile and said, The people of Lone and Intis are indeed different. Ha, that makes me think of a joke. Please allow me to be presumptuous. Bakerland squinted his eyes and said, After a good time with a beautiful girl, most Lone men would say, Oh, dear, I'd like a cigarette, but most Intis men would say. He deliberately paused, and Audrey tilted her head, trying her best to keep her nausea in check while looking puzzled. What would they say? Most of the Intis men would say, Oh, baby, I have to return now and can't be discovered by my wife. Bakerland raised his glass and laughed. People who can laugh at themselves always have an additional charm to them. Audrey smiled politely. Her beautiful, clear, dark green eyes suddenly turned to look behind Ambassador Bakerland. I'm sorry, a friend is looking for me. It's a pleasure talking to you. Bakerland bowed and moved aside. Audrey moved forward gracefully and didn't look back again. Just as she was considering who she should find as the object of her excuse, a young gentleman approached her and, lowering his voice, warned her, Audrey, don't be fooled by that Ambassador Bakerland, he's a dirty old man. I don't know how many women he's tricked into bed. Bakerland is lustful. This is in line with my observations. This is a weakness. Audrey smiled without hiding her disgust. Cance, do you have a misconception about me? Goddess, how could I be bewitched by that Ambassador Bakerland? His cologne makes me want to vomit, his words are so foul, and his taste is like a male peacock. Cance was Viscount Learson's youngest son, and their family was on fairly good terms with the Hall family. According to Audrey, Cance had entered MI9 after graduating from Tingen University and had become quite enigmatic. Her original plan had been to have a chat with Ambassador Backlund, and observe him up close before using the pretext of exasperation to get more information from Cance and his other friends from the intelligence community to learn more about him. To her surprise, she didn't need to seek out Cance Learson since he came over and started the corresponding conversation on his own accord. Your feelings are correct. Cance gave a sincere smile. He surveyed his surroundings and whispered, Besides, Bakerland is a very dangerous fellow. How dangerous? Audrey asked curiously. Have you heard of Beyonders? I know that you've always been interested in such matters, Cance said with some deliberation. Audrey gently nodded. I know quite a bit, most of it being told to me by Glaint. Cance took a glance at Bakerland, who was chatting with an affluent lady, and said with a serious expression, He's Intis's intelligence head in our kingdom. He's done numerous atrocities, but we haven't been able to gather any evidence of his crimes. He's a Sequence 6, a conspiracist. He didn't go into details with an outsider like Audrey, nor did he mention that conspiracist was part of the Hunter pathway. However, Audrey was already aware of this. She feigned naivety and sighed. He's really amazing. He has an assistant in the shadows, one that has perhaps reached Sequence 5. In addition to that, all of the Intis intelligence agents in the kingdom are under his management. Many of them are Beyonders. Unfortunately, we only know a few of them, Cance added in passing. don't be too happy if Bakerland praises you either. It's not what he truly thinks. He just wants to use this opportunity to gather more information. I don't like what you're saying. Audrey looked up at the ornate chandelier and thought for a few seconds. Is Bakerland very smart? You haven't managed to get any incriminating evidence. He truly is good at scheming, but he also has a lot of problems. He likes to chase after women and loves the feeling of romance. He takes risks and is quite radical. If it wasn't for his identity as an ambassador preventing us from taking action easily, he would have been captured long ago. Kent stroked his chin and said, however, he'll be replaced very soon. Very soon. Why? Audrey asked in surprise. My dear beautiful lady, this isn't something you should know. Kent adhered to the principle of confidentiality. When the ball was almost over, Audrey, who had gathered quite a bit of information, found Viscount Glaint and asked him to help her contact Zio and Furs. Chapter 243, Catching the Adulterous Act. Wednesday morning, across from the Coim Company, in the Sherwood Borough. Klein was sitting on a wooden bench outside the Gardley department store, clutching a paper bag containing the most famous Cindy Desi pie in the area with one hand, and holding a cup of iced tea in the other. Beside him, a tramp was curled up on the other side of the bench, sleeping. 10 minutes later, the mall's security guard woke him up and shooed him away. Klein wore gold-rimmed spectacles which didn't provide for any vision correction and a silk half-top hat. He didn't look much different from most of the gentlemen around him. He idly looked across the street at the Coim Company, lifted his right hand, and took a large bite of the Cindy Desi pie. He felt the rich aroma gush out and fill his oral cavity. The reason why this pie from Desi Bay stood out amongst the southern pies was that it used a lot of oil and fat, but the meat was chopped into very tiny bits. With the fat and lean meat mixed together, it didn't feel too heavy. The rich, meaty juice seeped into the outer crust, neutralizing the dryness and made up for its shortcomings. The wheat fragrance was clearly brought out, and the small pieces of crushed apples were used to stimulate appetite with a slightly sour and sweet taste while neutralizing the oily taste. It's okay. Although the weather isn't good and the pollution is terrible, Backlund is far superior to Tingen in many other aspects. Foods of all styles can be found everywhere. There are all kinds of operas and plays available. They can be enjoyed as long as one isn't afraid to spend money. Although I might not necessarily eat or partake in such entertainment, I have these options at the very least. This is the advantage of a big city. Klein raised his sweet iced tea and took a sip. He never took his eyes off the Coim Company's entrance. For that £10, he had been sitting there since 8 in the morning. Even his breakfast was bought on the way there. Of course, for most private detectives, a commission of £10 was an absolutely enviable business, equivalent to about 3 weeks' salary for a member of the middle class. According to the information provided by Mary Gale, her husband was currently the first manager of Coim Company and was Luke Sammer's superior. However, their shares in the Coim Company came from Mary's father, and Mary had inherited it. One of the immediate reasons she suspected her husband of having a mistress was that an employee in the company had divulged to her that Daraga Gale would leave the office on Wednesday and Friday mornings alone and only return in the afternoon. In addition, he would leave work early for 2 days a week, and Mary had never seen her husband return home before 7. After breakfast, Klein waited another hour plus before seeing his target walk out of Coim. He was wearing a black top hat, a double-breasted tweed coat, and a standard bow tie. He was slightly fat, with yellowish temples, slightly brownish eyes, and a slightly long face. Daraga Gale. He silently recited his target's name, stood up, picked up his cane and his heavy portable camera, and crossed the road. Instead of getting his carriage driver to pick him up, he stood by the side of the road and looked around for a rental carriage. Klein took the opportunity to cross the road and arrive beside him. Pretending to be careless, he bumped into his target. Sorry, I'm quite lost. Klein bowed his head in apology. Daraga frowned, but remained silent, waving his hand to indicate that it didn't matter. Klein bent down, bowed, and walked to the end of the street. He didn't run into Daragu in order to steal his belongings and use the dowsing method to easily track him. That would have been easily noticeable. Instead, Klein had only done one thing when he collided with Daragu. With the help of his agility as a clown, he had secretly slipped a spare button of his into one of the pockets of Daragu's double-breasted coat. Going around a corner, he stopped and looked back just in time to see Daragu board a rental carriage. Klein was in no hurry to tail him. He waited patiently for a few minutes before slowly getting into another horse carriage and said to the carriage driver, "Just go according to my instructions. Head to the end of the street first." "All right." The driver didn't ask why. Inside the carriage, Klein leaned his cane and began performing a divination. However, his divination statement wasn't directed at Daragu Gale. Instead, it became, "The whereabouts of the spare button of my clothes." The dowsing rod seeking was originally the most practical technique to find objects. Only seers were able to use it to seek people. Now, Klein was using it in its original form. The easiest and most convenient items to find were those that belonged to himself. Along the way, Klein kept getting the carriage driver to change directions until they finally arrived at a street house in the Hillston borough. When they first circled it, Klein noticed that there were gardens and lawns behind the house, which was different from the other houses. His dowsing method told him that Daragu Gale was inside that house. After paying the 2 soli fare, Klein walked to the door with marble statues outside. He saw 2 men in black and white plaid uniforms that resembled the police uniform. "I don't know you. Where's your proof of membership?" One of them, a brown-skinned man of Southern Continent blood, stopped Klein. "Proof of membership?" Klein hid his heavy camera behind him and asked with a slight frown. The brown-skinned man immediately turned stern. "This is the Quelag Club. Only our members and up to one of their guests can enter." Klein tersely acknowledged. "Then how can I join your club?" "You can only join after receiving a recommendation from 2 members." The brown-skinned man didn't brutally chase him away, but patiently answered the question. He couldn't guarantee that Klein would end up joining the club eventually. "All right." Klein pursed his lips and decided to put Plan B into motion. He found a hotel near the Quelag Club and got a short-stay room for 4 hours. Then, he locked the door behind him, drew the curtains, and entered the space above the gray fog. He conjured a yellowish-brown goatskin and a fountain pen in front of him. Taking a deep breath, Klein wrote the exact same divination sentence as before, "The whereabouts of the spare button of my clothes." This time, he didn't use the dowsing method, but a dream divination. The reason why he didn't do it in the real world was because Klein felt that the Quelag Club seemed to be quite a high-end club, and he suspected that there might be some powerful beyonders inside. In order to not waste time, he decided to get it done once and for all. In the gray dreamy world, Klein was the first to see Daragu's black coat, which was hung on a coat rack. On the carpet in front of it was a round table. The scene zoomed out, and the sight of a romping man and woman entered Klein's eye. The man was Daragu Gale, the woman had shimmering blonde hair who looked rather young. She was in her early 20s at most. The pained expression with her knitted brows does look rather coquettish. Why am I always seeing scenes such as this? Klein covered his eyes and woke up. The fact that Daragu has a mistress is confirmed. How do I get material evidence? By responding to my prayers. But this is limited to what I can obtain with my own body. I can only do it through sketching and not through the camera. I can't possibly draw a picture with my bare hands, can I? It looks like today won't do. I'll tail that girl and find out her address and name later. I refuse to believe that they'll be inside the Quelag Club every time they meet. Detective Klein quickly came up with his next course of action. Just as he was about to leave the mysterious space above the gray fog, he suddenly thought of something. He decided to take the opportunity to divine if the iron-black threadworm which had infiltrated his room was under the control of a beyonder of the seer pathway. He didn't do so before because he felt that the relevant information was too scarce, and it was difficult to create something out of nothing which would result in a failed divination. It would have been the same if he was above the grey fog. Furthermore, he had various matters to divine the few times he came above the grey fog previously, and he didn't have the capacity to bother with such a question. Now that he was free, he decided that it wouldn't hurt to do the divination. As for the question of whether it was risky to contact Azek, he had already long divined it. The answer was that it was risky, and not something trivial, so he could only use it as his last resort. After writing the corresponding divination statement, Klein removed the silver chain from his sleeve and allowed the topaz pendant to hang over the paper. The iron-black threadworm that sneaked into my room was controlled by a beyonder from the seer pathway. After repeating it 7 times, Klein opened his eyes and saw that the spirit pendulum was spinning clockwise, with great amplitude and frequency. Positive. The answer is positive. Shouldn't it have failed? Klein didn't expect to obtain such an answer. According to his seer instincts, such a divination was likely to fail. Why? He frowned and thought for a while before deciding to switch to a different method of divination and target. He wanted to directly divine the controller using dream divination. This time, Klein saw nothing in his dream, and couldn't get the corresponding revelation about the seer pathway beyonder. That's more like it, he muttered and thought back to the prior divination and fell into deep thought. They should have been a lack of conditions and result in a failed divination just like the one that followed. Could it be that this mysterious space had filled in the necessary conditions? Does it contain something of the seer pathway? Klein suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He had a bold idea. Perhaps, the mysterious space above the grey fog had something to do with the path of the seer pathway. Klein lightly rapped the edge of the ancient table. Despite thinking about it, he couldn't find any other evidence. He could only temporarily put this matter on hold and prepare for his return to the real world. Regardless, I've confirmed at least one thing. The mid-sequence beyonder beside the ambassador is from the seer pathway, and whether he's a member of the seer doesn't matter. This might be my chance of obtaining the sequence 7 and even the sequence 6 potion formula. Klein extended his spirituality and wrapped it around him before plunging into the grey fog. Meanwhile, in Viscount Glaint's study, Audrey let the master of the study guard the door while she looked at Zio and Furs. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "I need your help with a mission." "What mission?" Zio's eyes lit up as if she could smell the ink on the bills. Audrey gave her a polite smile. "Assassinate the Intis ambassador to the Lone Kingdom, Bakerland Jean Mudun." Chapter 244, Appointee What? Furs touched her earlobes, wondering if she had heard wrongly. The beautiful, naive, curious, and scatterbrained Miss Audrey actually assigned an assassination mission. Furthermore, the target is the ambassador of Intis, a powerful country in the northern continent. Zio was slow on the uptake as she hesitantly said, "Our strength isn't enough to complete this mission." The first thing she considered was the difficulty of the mission. Audrey ignored her question and allowed her to imagine the reason. She said, with faint dimples showing, "I'm not asking you to take the job. I just wish for you to find a beyonder with the strength to complete it. For example, Mr. A, I'll pay you 4,000 gold pounds for this. Of course, this is only my initial offer. The details are negotiable. If it eventually succeeds, I'll pay you 500 pounds. Even if the mission ends up failing, you will receive 200 pounds due to the risk you have taken." Her uninvested annuity and the rest of the bounty was around 13,000 pounds. However, any large utilization of it would certainly attract the attention of Count Hall, and even the Varvat Bank would investigate. She had calculated that 5,000 pounds was the tipping point, and it was best not to exceed it. 4,000 gold pounds. Zio heard her own heavy breathing, but she quickly became depressed, knowing full well that she wouldn't be able to complete the mission herself. Just 500 pounds to seek out other beyonders in our names while maintaining it a secret. Miss Audrey is the most generous and beautiful lady I've ever seen. Zio quickly returned to reality. While feeling enticed, Firz's mind was filled with questions. Why would Miss Audrey delegate such a mission? Is there some internal strife among nobles? Is this the precursor to inciting a war? Is Count Hall representing some important figure in a bid to make the situation turn chaotic? The duo quickly contacted Mr. A using a previously agreed-upon channel. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the rare sunlight shined through the fog and lit up the whole of Backlund, they arrived at the house where they had previously participated in gatherings. There, they saw Mr. A sitting with his legs up and his hood over his head, but he gave off a condescending air. "You said that you have something important to talk to me about." Mr. A's eyes moved back and forth between the two ladies. "I heard that some female beyonders would use their bodies to trade for potion ingredients with Mr. A. He's really a disgusting pervert." Furze curled her lips and said, "There's a large transaction, I wonder if you're interested in it." Mr. A scanned Zio's face and chuckled. "Tell me. Let's see what this large transaction is." Holding back the urge to draw her triangular blade, Zio answered with the tone of a tribunal, "Assassinate the Intis ambassador to the Lone Kingdom, Bakerland Jean Madun." Mr. A fell silent, but since his expression was obscured by the shadow of his hood, Zio and Furze couldn't guess what he was thinking. After a while, he slowly leaned back and said with a deep voice, "So, what's the reward?" £4,000. In addition, we will provide the relevant information such as Ambassador Bakerland is a Sequence 6 conspiracist of the Hunter pathway, or that his weakness is lust. Zio tried her best to make Mr. A believe that there was hope in completing the mission. Mr. A chuckled and said, "I can accept this mission, but the reward must be raised. The first choice, the potion formulas to Unshadowed, Cataclysmic Interrer, Prophet, or Manipulator. Of course, their price is higher than this mission. There's no need for the complete formula. A partial formula will suffice. The second choice, 10,000 gold pounds. This is the bounty of Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. Bakerland's strength definitely isn't as strong as he is, but he has powerful aides. Besides, believe me, he definitely has mystical objects on him. A reasonable price, but that's also an exaggerated price." Zio and Furze looked at each other and said, "We shall return and discuss it. At this time tomorrow, we'll give you our answer." "Sure." Mr. A made a gesture of farewell. After being led out by an attendant, Furze murmured in puzzlement, "Those are high-sequence Beyonder formulas? Frankly speaking, I find it strange. I thought Mr. A would only want formulas or potion ingredients. Money shouldn't be a necessity for him." Zio turned to look at her friend. "Furze, you really are a naive clinical doctor and author. You must know that Mr. A has many subordinates. They need a house to sleep in, stomachs to fill, clothes to buy, and the need to vent their desires. All of this has to be bought using money. Besides, to some nobles who have declined, what wouldn't they sell if there are gold pounds to be made? Without his men, Mr. A would be just as scary, but he will be rather lacking in intelligence. That's what all the small gangs in the East Borough know." Furze frowned and said, "Zio, you're not that stupid after all." In the evening, the two of them met the familiar large golden retriever at a predetermined location and passed Mr. A's reply to Audrey. When Audrey finished reading the note, not only did she not feel stumped, she even let out a long sigh of relief. It was simply wonderful for her that she could finish the ambassador with just 10,000 gold pounds. "For the time being, I can only use 5,000 pounds. I'll still have to pay Zio and Furze 500 pounds. Well, first of all, I'll borrow 6,000 pounds, no, 8,000 pounds. I can't expose any problems with my daily expenses. Then, I'll pay him back over 4 to 5 months, with interest of 1,000 pounds. Before the new year, I will be quite poor, having only 1,000 pounds to use a month." Audrey quickly made her decision. Then she burned the original slip of paper and wrote on a new piece of paper. The second option. An advance of £2,000 and the remaining £8,000 will be paid after the mission is completed. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein saw Mary Gale again at tea time. He had initiated the meeting through Mrs. Stellan Sammer. Madam Mary, I found out that your husband went to the Quelag Club while tailing him. However, I wasn't able to enter because I'm not a member of the club. Even so, according to my observations, about half an hour after your husband left, only one young lady came out. Her name is Erica Taylor, who lives at 126 New Year's Street, Hillston Borough. She used to work at Coim for a period of time and is currently unemployed. I took a picture of her leaving the Quelag Club. She's unemployed, yet, she can live in Hillston Borough, Stellan sneered. Mary wore a gloomy expression as she remained silent for a few seconds. You have to obtain material evidence of them being intimate. Oh. The Quelag Club, right? I'll get 2 members to nominate you as a member, but you must fill in your particulars as famous detective. I can't get people to bring you in because it might not mesh well with the schedules of others. All right. Klein hesitated, but still asked, who will pay the club fees? I will be responsible for the initial fees. This is in return for your efficiency. If you wish to remain in the club, you will have to pay the annual fee of about £15 yourself. There seemed to be a fire burning in Mary's eyes. The fee is £15 a year, and the initiation fee is at least £50. A high-end club. Madam Mary, you sure are generous. Klein immediately nodded. I will provide you with the evidence as soon as possible. After dinner, Klein went out again and continued to the Bravehearts bar in the Backlund Bridge area. There were 2 reasons for this. First, he wanted to show his helplessness in front of the military's special department and the police who were observing him in secret. He wanted to appear as though he was trying every method to save himself. Second, he also wanted to deceive the mid-sequence Beyonder from the seer pathway under the ambassador's command. In matters involving the grey fog, Klein believed that the gentleman or lady would never be able to succeed in a divination, including his own resurrection and past events, as well as how he had successfully created the language of foulness charm through the help of the true creator. This is definitely a powerful item that can affect my opponent. Klein had to maintain his act of feeling unsafe and his act of madly grasping at all kinds of straw to mislead his opponent in order to increase his chances of victory. Under the dark night, Klein entered the bar. Before he could get a beer, he saw Kaspers, the old man with the brandy nose, standing in front of the rat-baiting ring with his arms crossed. Perfect timing. Marek is looking for you. Kaspers spotted Klein and limped over. Marek is looking for me? Klein asked in shock. Instinctively, he touched the Azek's copper whistle in his pocket and considered what excuse he could use to politely decline the meeting. Or could it be that wrapping the copper whistle with one's spirituality wouldn't cause any zombie-like phenomenon? It wasn't like Mr. Azek hadn't been to the cemetery before, nor had any corpses attacked him. Klein tensed up. Before he could come up with an excuse, he saw Marek, his face pale and his eyes filled with malice, walking over. He wasn't surrounded by any zombies. Where are his zombies? Klein thought with a mixture of puzzlement and relief. Marek pointed to the card room and walked over there first. Klein looked into the distance and followed him since there were no zombies. What's the matter? Klein took the initiative to ask. Marek, in a black vest and white shirt, sat on the card table and stared into Klein's eyes. Does that job of yours still stand? Huh? Klein wasn't able to react in time. I have a friend who is short on money and is willing to accept this commission. She's stronger than me and should be able to protect you. However, she can only protect you for 3 days. The price is £1,000, Marek said in a low, slurred voice. Why is a Beyonder willing to accept the commission only after I acquired the language of foulness? However, this is good as well. This will be able to confuse the ambassador's Beyonder. After he painstakingly defeats Marek's friend, my chances of success will become extremely high. The only problem is determining if Merrick's friend is trustworthy. I'll go above the gray fog to divine it. Klein pondered for a moment and said, "Give me time to consider it and save up the necessary funds. It's not a small sum. Also, it's best if the person protecting me is hidden. It must be confidential. As for the 3 days of protection, that is up to me. It's definitely within these 2 weeks. Of course, the seer would definitely be aware of it." Klein silently added. As for money, he had already considered it from the beginning. If selling Massalt's Beyonder characteristic wasn't enough, he would ask Miss Justice for money. After all, he had made the preparations. Roselle's diary still had a lot of knowledge that could be sold. Of course, if the price was simply unacceptable, he could forego it. Now, although Massalt's Beyonder characteristic had become the language of foulness charm, I still have Miss Justice. She still owes me the money needed for Sequence 8 Light Suppliant as well as the intelligence regarding the secret order. Combining those together, £1,000 would be enough. Chapter 245, Confirmation. Back home at 15 Minsk Street, Klein was in no hurry to head above the grey fog to perform a divination. Instead, he acted as though nothing had happened. In the process, he heard an illusory prayer and vaguely recognized it as a woman's voice. After experiencing the ravaging murmurs of the true creator, my ability in this aspect has apparently improved a little. Klein turned the newspaper while engrossed in thought and settled himself on the reclining chair in a motionless half-slumped state. He waited until the clock nearly struck 10, before putting down what he was doing and went to the bathroom on the second floor to clean himself up. Entering the bedroom and pulling the curtains shut, Klein went above the grey fog. He saw that the crimson star symbolizing justice was constantly expanding and contracting, and it was also echoing with prayers. Klein spread out his spirituality and made contact. Dressed in a white silk nightgown, Miss Justice appeared in front of him. Her figure was still blurry, as if she was in bed. After reciting his honorable name, Audrey cut to the chase. Ambassador Bakerland is a Sequence 6 conspiracist of the Hunter pathway. He's suspected to have a Sequence 5 assistant. After I obtained detailed information, I got someone to inquire Mr. A. He has agreed to accept the assassination mission, but the conditions are 10,000 gold pounds or any of the potion formulas of Unshadowed, Cataclysmic Interrer, Prophet, and Manipulator. They do not need to be complete. A portion of the formula would suffice. I chose the former and paid an advance of £2,000. Honorable Mr. Fool, was my decision correct? 10,000 gold pounds. The corner of Klein's lips twitched as he forced himself to focus on the matter. The Sequence 5 assistant should be that seer pathway infiltrator. The first thing that should be done is to overestimate the enemy. Would Mr. A have the ability to do it? Would he neglect the job after taking the money? Cataclysmic Interrer, Prophet, Manipulator, and Unshadowed are likely Sequence 4s. That is the threshold of a high Sequence Beyonder. It is very likely that Mr. A is one of the 22 oracles of the Aurora Order. To be stationed in the City of Cities, Backlund, means that he's second only to the 5 saints of the Aurora Order's upper echelons. He must be the cream of the crop among the oracles. The Aurora Order wields the secret suppliant pathway, which is the direct route to the true creator. As an oracle, he has a high probability of being a Beyonder of this sequence chain. Based on Backlund's position, it can be inferred that he's at Sequencer's 5, Shepherd. Of course, he could also be a Rose Bishop that's one sequence lower, but that would mean that he's more outstanding in other aspects, such as his intelligence. I have to remind Miss Justice that she shouldn't have too many interactions with Mr. A. The Beyonders of the secret suppliant sequence are either already lunatics exhibiting abnormalities or lunatics who have hidden their insanity well, almost without exception. Sequence 8 listeners in this sequence pathway often hear the voice of the true creator. Yes, only a lunatic would be bold enough to accept the mission of assassinating an Intis ambassador and have the courage to complete it. I have here a portion of the unshadowed potion formula, as well as the corresponding ritual needed for the advancement. This can save Miss Justice 10,000 gold pounds. Why would Mr. A only need the formulas of unshadowed, cataclysmic interrer, prophet, and manipulator? Are these paths that can be swapped at high sequences of the secret suppliant pathway? That's a bit too much. That makes it 5 in total. Unshadowed is from the eternal blazing Sunday. Cataclysmic interrer sounds like it's from the Lord of Storms or maybe the Evernight goddess. I previously determined that the eternal blazing sun, Lord of Storms, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom have pathways that are relatively similar, therefore, they view each other with animosity. From the looks of it, cataclysmic interrer belongs to the Lord of Storms and is sequence 4 of the Sailor sequence. Prophet is likely from the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Then which pathway does manipulator belong to? It'll be interesting if they can all be exchanged with the sequence corresponding to the true creator. Yes. I cannot give the unshadowed formula to Mr. A. Not even a portion. The Aurora Order members are all lunatics who are always looking for opportunities to take revenge on the world to the detriment of public safety. Items of strategic importance must not be traded with them. This isn't just a question of the bottom line, it also involves my own safety. Once the time is ripe, those lunatics from the Aurora Order might very well sacrifice the entire city. Let Miss Justice spend the 10,000 pounds then. Part of it includes the payment she would like to give to my adorer. The rest can be made up to her with the knowledge I already know. Klein reached out and pinched his cheek. He didn't reply to Justice immediately. Instead, he conjured a pen and paper, ready to make a divination. Klein had no idea who Merrick's friend was. He could only tell from the pronoun, she, that the person was a woman. Failure was inevitable if he wanted to directly divine the reliability of the person in question. However, Klein could make an indirect divination regarding his own safety, which would have a much higher success rate. As for whether he would suffer an interference or how accurate the outcome would be, he wasn't worried at all thanks to the gray fog's shielding. After more than 10 seconds of deliberation, Klein wrote, "It's risky for me to hire Merrick's friend to be my bodyguard for 3 days." Putting the pen away, he removed his spirit pendulum, focused his mind, and quickly performed the divination. When he opened his eyes, he saw that the topaz pendant was rotating clockwise. However, the amplitude was very small and its speed was very slow. There's a certain risk, but it's quite low. Reliable. Klein nodded slightly and changed to divine about Mr. A. Similarly, he had no direct contact with Mr. A, and all he knew was based on descriptions and inference. It was difficult to find out whether or not he was capable enough, or willing to keep his promise. All he could do was make an indirect divination. As an excellent seer, Klein quickly determined the direction, and that was to divine Ambassador Baker Land. This ambassador had relatively more connections with him, and the information he had about him was even more detailed. Klein knew very well what the other party was involved in, and as a divination target, there were no problems. After some thought, Klein wrote, "Bakerland Jean Mudun will have his life threatened by Mr. A." To prevent it from failing, he tried his best to make the words vague in this low-confidence divination and didn't require a definite answer. This time, Klein saw that the spirit pendulum was still rotating clockwise, but it had become faster and the amplitude had increased. It means that Mr. A will attempt to complete the mission, and that there's a good chance of success. Klein slowly exhaled and began to respond to Miss Justice's prayer. "Sure. There's no problems with your decision. You absolutely must not show yourself when entrusting this mission. My adorer wishes for 1,000 pounds for his activities. It will be done in the same way as before, and it would be best if it can be completed by tomorrow. This will be payment for the light suppliant formula. You do not need to seek out news regarding the secret order any further. However, if you obtain any relevant information, I will do a trade with you." After learning that the infiltrator was a beyonder in the seer pathway, Klein's need for information about the secret order became less urgent. He had originally wanted to ask for more than £1,000, but in consideration of how Miss Justice had to pay £10,000 to assassinate the ambassador, it was likely that her finances would be stretched to the limit, therefore, he only asked for the minimum. After doing all of this, Klein didn't linger and immediately returned to the real world. Audrey was holding a music score and humming a melody. The red moon was faintly discernible outside the window. Suddenly, a thick gray fog appeared in front of her. A figure seated on an ancient chair looked down at her and spoke in a low voice. Audrey let out a breath of relief after hearing Mr. Fool's response. She was no longer as nervous as she was. £1,000. My debt to Mr. Fool is close to being paid off. I feel so much more relaxed suddenly. Audrey rested the music score against her chest and thought with her dimples showing. Although she only had £1,000 to spend for quite a considerable period of time in the coming days, being put in a tight financial situation, all she needed to do was grit her teeth, and squeezing out £1,000 wouldn't be a problem. I'll borrow more from Glaint and drag it out with more installments. Audrey had quite a good education in finances. After all, her father was a powerful banker behind the scenes. At noon on Thursday, Klein heard another illusory prayer. He then confirmed that Miss Justice had deposited the money into his anonymous account. The bank reconciliation and liquidation done in Backlund could be completed on the same day, meaning that from Friday, Klein would be able to withdraw the cash from any Backlund bank branch in the city. After lunch, Klein once again saw Mary Gale. She led him outside the Quelag Club, where the two members were waiting. One was a well-known surgeon, Aaron Series, and the other was the aristocratic equestrian teacher, Talon Dumont. After greeting each other, the lanky and somewhat aloof doctor wearing gold-rimmed glasses entered the club first, leaving the equestrian teacher, Talon, who had short brown curly hair, to converse with Klein amidst smiles. If it wasn't for Mary mentioning you, I wouldn't have known that Backlund has had an additional outstanding detective join its ranks. If there's anything I need to do in the future, I'll look for you. Then, let me thank you in advance. Klein smiled in response. According to Mary's introduction on the carriage, he learned that Talon was originally of noble blood. His grandfather had a noble title of Viscount, but it was a pity that his grandfather had squandered all his wealth. His father had nearly 10 brothers and more than 6 sisters, and as nobles whose titles were determined by the amount of land they possessed, once the amount of land went beneath a particular standard, the hereditary nobility title would be reduced. However, that also depended on the king's mood. Talon was unlike the other children of nobility who could obtain a considerable sum of money when they reached adulthood. And due to his grandfather's reputation, he had no means of entering the government as an employee, or to be a butler of another noble family. Therefore, he could only play to his advantages and became an equestrian teacher for many nobles. His income was quite sizable, with about £400 a year. Sigh, divorce really leads to poverty. It was unknown if Talon was hinting at Mary Gale's situation or if he was reminded of his grandfather, who seemed to be more of Intis ancestry. Unable to engage in the conversation, Klein followed him into the Quelag Club, where he saw a large, brightly lit hall. Chapter 246. Strange Omen. Aaron and Talon left the Quelag Club after they separately completed the nomination form. It wasn't a weekend, the former had 2 more operations in the afternoon, and the latter had to teach Viscount Conrad's youngest son horse riding. The teenager needed to ensure that he didn't embarrass himself during the Backlund social events in the second half of the year. Klein watched the manservant dressed in a red vest and a maid in a beautiful dress come and go a few times before finally delivering him his own proof of membership and a badge with the symbol of the Frost constellation engraved on it. An entry fee of £50. There are still 3.5 months left this year, with an annual fee of £4 a year. The manservant in the red vest pushed the 2 objects to Klein. Klein took out the £57 which Mary Gale had given him and handed him £54. The amount beyond the entry fee and annual fee was Mary's first payment. She was very pleased with how quickly Klein obtained information on Daraga Gale's mistress, as well as her photo. £50 membership. Madame Mary is such a generous lady. While Klein watched the manservant and the maid verify the money and confirm the exact amount, he recalled Stellan Sammer's private introduction. Mary's father was a co-founder of the Coim company and had a 20% stake. It was originally just a small company that barely made money, but as Backlund's pollution worsened and the demand for anthracite and charcoal increased, the company rapidly expanded to become one of the top 10 companies in the capital's industry. As such, Mary's net worth skyrocketed. The only problem was that when she was married to Daraga Gale, the company was still quite an unknown company. Her father hadn't paid much attention to using the shares as her dowry and didn't proceed with any protection of estate gifting and had instead used the more popular willing of gifts. The former referred to the dowry as an independent and separate estate of the woman and not subjected to her husband's control. Even the right of use depended on the woman, while the latter assigned the dowry's ownership to the entire family. However, the husband had to immediately make a valid will to promise that if he passed away before his partner, the split of the estate would be 2 to 4 times the rights and interests of the dowry received. After which, the rest would proceed according to the normal inheritance laws which could effectively guarantee the livelihood of the widow. If Mary initiated a divorce before she could get evidence of Daraga's adultery, the Coim company shares would be divided equally between both parties. Klein remembered Stellan saying enviously, the current value of those shares is currently close to 20,000 gold pounds. Adding the other property in their name, Mary is a truly wealthy lady. Once she's divorced, she will definitely become the target of many men in Backlund, including some nobles. That's only enough money for Miss Justice to assassinate Ambassador Bakerland twice. Klein suddenly thought about that when he saw the red-vested manservant and the good-looking maid bow at him. "Mr. Moriarty, welcome to the Quelag Club." Upon hearing this, Klein picked up the proof of membership and the frost badge. The former was made of elastic paper which looked like a card with Klein's name and his membership start date on it. After applying an imprint of his index finger, the proof of membership was officially ready for use. The latter was the Quelag Club's distinctive badge, named for its founding in early November, which corresponded to the month of the Frost constellation. The symbol and the number 192 were printed on the front, followed by Sherlock Moriarty, imprinted on the back. The club now has 192 members. Klein asked casually. "Yes, our club doesn't accept people without a recommendation." The red-vested manservant beamed and introduced, "On the first floor, there's a buffet cafeteria, bar, library, squash room, conference room, and card room. You can use them all for free. The food and wine are free for your sampling as well. There are 16 lounge rooms and 2 small conference rooms on the second floor. They are also free, and can be used as long as they aren't occupied." The good-looking maid pointed to the rear and said, "There are 2 tennis courts on the lawn, totally free of charge. There are 2 shooting ranges underground, and you only need to pay the corresponding rental fee of the equipment. If you aren't satisfied with the simple buffet, you can order à la carte. We have an exclusive chef, and you just need to pay for the ingredients. Board, lodging, and entertainment are all provided for. As expected of a high-end club." Klein sincerely thanked Mrs. Mary. He smiled warmly and said, "Send someone to show me around so that I can familiarize myself with the environment. Afterward, give me a lounge to take an afternoon nap." "All right." The red manservant made an inviting gesture. After familiarizing himself with the Quelag Club's environment, Klein entered a lounge and carefully studied the layout of the place. He discovered it was similar to a hotel room of the later generation. It was said to be decorated in the Intis style. "I have to consider how to obtain evidence of Daraga's affair tomorrow. It's simply impossible to hide the flash of the camera. In other words, I only have one shot at taking a picture. And if I do that, I'll definitely be kicked out of the club. I have to think of a safe way. I'll read through the papers later and try to determine the progress regarding Ian's case through the news. From there, I can determine which 3 days I should be guarded. Klein paced back and forth, lost in thought. At that moment, his heart suddenly palpitated as he tensed up. Is this the premonition of a clown? However, there are no scenes in my mind. Klein felt the air around him turn still, like it was the calm before the storm. Soon, this feeling disappeared, as if nothing had happened. Could it be that danger is approaching? But nothing like this happened when I was attacked by Masalt. Puzzled, Klein pulled out a coin and divined if he would be attacked in the next few days. The answer was negative. After thinking for a few seconds, Klein drew the curtains and pretended to take an afternoon nap. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. He sat down and pondered for a long time before muttering to himself, I will be in grave danger in the next few days. After repeating the statement, he flicked the coin again and saw the copper-colored object tumble down and land in his open palm. This time, the portrait of the king was facing up. It meant a positive result. My reaction just now really was an omen that danger is coming. Klein narrowed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. He was rather puzzled by this matter. Whether it was as a seer or clown, they had never displayed such abilities before. Even if they could predict danger, it was because the target was right in front of him or beside him. There was nobody around me. From the fact that my divination was misled, it must have involved a relatively higher sequencer, most likely Bakerland's assistant. In the end, it actually gave me a premonition. This isn't scientific, this isn't mystic. There must be something else behind it, but I can't be certain why yet. Klein looked around and saw the boundless fog, crimson and still, the palace standing as it had always stood. He reined in his doubts and temporarily stopped thinking about the reason. Instead, he focused his attention on the attack that was about to occur. After several more divinations, Klein found that he could only confirm that there would be great danger in the next few days. It couldn't be shortened to 3 days, 2 days, or even 5 hours. In other words, he could only obtain a somewhat vague revelation. And in a dream divination, he saw Ian dressed in his old coat, standing in the street with the elegant gas lamps and the blurry crimson moon behind him. Other than this image, there was nothing else. How should I interpret this? Klein thought for a moment. He could only assume that this was the prelude to danger. Without further delay, he returned to the real world, left the Quelag Club, and went to the nearby Hillston branch of the Backlund Bank to withdraw the remaining £100 from his account. The sum of £1,000 from Justice hasn't been cleared yet and reconciled. Without the corresponding information sent to the branches, the account wasn't synchronized, and, theoretically speaking, there was a loophole. Klein could withdraw £100 from another branch and seize the opportunity when all the accounts were out of sync. However, this was only in theory. In order to avoid similar acts, the banks had many rules on anonymous accounts. First, it was to enhance the transmission of similar information in the same city. Second, it was to limit a single withdrawal to no more than £500, and third, if the last withdrawal wasn't done locally, a telegram was needed to inquire about it, and today, Klein encountered the third situation. Putting away the money, he took a horse carriage to the Backlund Bridge area and entered the Bravehearts bar. Under Kaspers's guidance, he saw Merrick sitting in the card room. He wasn't surrounded by zombies. Klein discarded the idea of using his spirituality to wrap Azek's copper whistle, slapped a £100 on the table, and said to the pale Merrick, I agree to the deal. I'll pay an advance of £100. I'll pay another £300 every additional day I'm protected. The protection begins now. Merrick's gaze fell past him and landed somewhere behind him. He nodded and said, all right, she has agreed. Ah. Klein turned back in surprise only to see the wall and nothing but air. He secretly activated his spirit vision, but failed to discover anything. Merrick stuffed the £100 into his pocket and said indifferently, you can return now. She has begun protecting you, in a hidden way. If I hadn't divined this beforehand, I would definitely think of all of you as cheats. Klein surveyed his surroundings and deliberately acted as though he left with clenched teeth. Along the way, he would occasionally activate and deactivate his spirit vision, constantly observing the outside through the carriage windows, but he didn't find his so-called bodyguard. Back at 15 Minsk Street, Klein closed the door, went into the bathroom, turned on the tap, and washed his hands. The sound of water splashing disappeared as he shook off the water droplets and wiped his palms with a towel. Then, he raised his head to look at himself in the mirror to inspect his appearance. At this moment, he saw himself phasing away in the mirror before transforming into a woman wearing a black regal dress. The woman had light golden hair and blue eyes. She looked very delicate, but her face was abnormally pale. She wore a small black bonnet, lifted her skirt, and bowed at Klein. This. Without hiding his surprise, Klein took a few steps back and leaned against the wall. Only then did he realize that this might be the bodyguard he had hired for £1,000. The image in the mirror quickly dimmed and Klein saw himself again. Everything had been restored back to normal. Chapter 247, the whole story. The figure in the mirror was clear, but it was as though the woman in the black regal dress had never appeared. Klein secretly activated his spirit vision, but didn't find anything. Did I just hire a female ghost as my bodyguard? She's even stranger than a female ghost. At the very least, one can see ghosts with spirit vision. Klein thoughtfully touched Azek's copper whistle in his pocket, feeling nothing but its cold chill. Like before, it didn't have any additional changes. She's unaffected by the copper whistle. Seems like she isn't an undead creature. However, I can't be sure. Back then, the copper whistle was buried with me, but the corpses surrounding me didn't act abnormally. Was it because those buried in the cemetery have experienced a send-off by the priests and bishops? When does it work and when doesn't it? When this business with the ambassador is over, and if I'm still alive, I'll go to the cemetery and try to figure out the scope of its effect and its limits. I can't always carry a time bomb like this. Klein washed his face and walked out of the bathroom. Just as he picked up the newspaper in the living room and was going to read it in the living room or bedroom, he heard the doorbell ring. Klein's mind tensed up when he heard the tinkling sounds. He put on his coat, with all kinds of materials in it, and walked towards the door gingerly. He clearly knew that danger was approaching in the next few days. After standing behind the door and waiting for a moment, the scene outside naturally surfaced in Klein's mind. The crimson moon was faintly discernible in the sky. The elegant gas lamps on both sides of the street lit up the wet road. A boy wearing an old coat stood there. His bright red eyes were deep and adrift. Ian Wright? Why did he appear? Isn't this what I saw in my dream divination? Is this the prelude to danger? Klein opened the door and took 2 cautious steps back. Detective Moriarty. Ian took off his brown top hat, bowed, and said in a low voice, I came to apologize. I'm sorry to have involved you in such a dangerous matter. Klein creased his eyebrows and probed, what you should have done is head to the police station. Ian looked around and bowed his head. I just came out from MI9. Ah. Is that the name of the military's special department? Klein stepped aside, pointed at the living room and said, maybe we can have a chat. I have to at least know what placed me in this situation. He sighed inwardly. Ian didn't stand on ceremony as he followed Klein into the living room and sat in the same spot as he did the last time. He was just about to open his mouth when Klein suddenly added, if what you plan on saying will put me in greater danger, then there's no need to tell me about it. No, everything will soon be over. Ian had a calmness that was beyond his age. Klein was relieved and asked out of curiosity, so, what exactly happened? Before he could finish his sentence, he saw a figure emerge from the panes of the oriel window across the room, a black regal dress, long hair tied in a bun, blue eyes, delicate features, and a pale face. It was the woman who had previously greeted Klein in the mirror. This woman seemed to find an illusory high-back chair and sat down. Her left palm supported her right elbow while her right hand supported her face, pretending to listen attentively while appearing expressionless. For a moment, Klein was left at a loss. Ian, who had been silent for a few seconds, said softly, "In fact, Detective Zriel is a spy for the Fasak Empire. He adopted several vagrant children and taught them how to gather intelligence. I am one of them. So that's how it is. I was involved in a huge spy conspiracy." Klein suddenly felt enlightened. Ian looked at the coffee table and continued, "We have the advantage of age, and are often ignored by others, allowing us to gather a lot of useful information. 2 weeks ago, I stumbled upon clues regarding Helmasuen's manuscript." Helmasuen? Klein found the name familiar. Ian looked up at him and explained, "Turani von Helmasuen, the greatest scientist after Emperor Rosell, a mathematician, a mechanist, and the father of the second-generation difference machine." So it's him. Klein suddenly remembered the relevant information. He wasn't only a great scientist, but also a crazy scientist. He believed that the inherent flaw in the existence of humans could only be fixed through machines. He loved eating sugar as if it was his own energy source. He mysteriously disappeared while researching a third-generation difference machine, and was an important figure that every country was trying to find. His manuscript? Does the manuscript involve third-generation difference machines? Klein asked probingly. A difference machine was a mechanical device for computing. It could effectively improve the efficiency of scientific research and various projects. In Klein's opinion, it was an alternative computer in the age of steam. Of course, it could only do computation at present. Ian shook his head. "I'm not sure. I didn't actually see it. Perhaps, it had some related ideas." He paused for a moment, then went on to recount what had happened. "When I reported this to Detective Zriel, he was very happy and told me to follow up on that lead while he immediately reported it to his superior. It took me some time to determine where the manuscript was, but I was afraid of the danger, so I didn't steal it directly. I decided to return to Detective Zriel, and after that, it was as I told you. Detective Zriel's house was infiltrated while many of the tiny traps were not restored, and he didn't respond to my contact request. This Manger gang tried to capture me. With your help, I confirmed the death of Detective Zriel. I took a fake tooth from his corpse. Oh, that happened after we parted. Detective Zriel told me that, inscribed on the inside of the fake tooth, there was a method to urgently contact his superior. It was a method that even he didn't know of and was something he would only remove if an accident occurred." Klein nodded slightly and said, "So you sent a telegram?" A rare look of surprise flashed across Ian's face as he asked, "Did the people from MI9 tell you that?" "No, a friend of mine happened to see you on Bacardi Street." Klein casually made up an excuse. "I see." Ian nodded in depression. "I got in touch with Detective Zriel's superior in Backlund via telegram and arranged the time, place, and manner of meeting, but soon enough, I was found by this Manger gang. No, to be exact, it was an intelligence officer of the Intis Republic. That was what the people from MI9 people told me. Fortunately, MI9 arrived in time, and both sides engaged in a chaotic battle. I took this opportunity to escape. However, when I met with Detective Zriel's superior this afternoon, I was once again ambushed by the Intis intelligence officers. Unfortunately, I was caught by them, and I was very afraid of dying, so I told them everything that I knew. However, they didn't keep their promise and still wanted to kill me. At that moment, MI9 finally found me. It is only during such times when you look like a 15 or 16-year-old teenager." Just as Klein was reflecting over this, he suddenly thought of a problem from what Ian had just said. Back when he discovered that something important was left behind on Zriel's corpse and that Ian had successfully taken it away, he had written the matter off, thinking that the Beyonder was lacking in skill, and that the Beyonder had missed out on something because the mediumship provided little useful information. However, after confirming that the ambassador had a mid-sequence Beyonder of the seer pathway, the situation became extremely peculiar. With powerful mediumship, it was impossible for the fake tooth to not be discovered. Leaving the body in such a remote and hard-to-find place didn't seem like a trap. Combined with Ian's description, the answer was obvious. Klein nodded and said, "Have you ever thought of the possibility that Zriel's superior has traitors around him, a traitor who has defected to the Intis intelligence services? That's also why Zriel was exposed and killed when he obtained the clue to the manuscript, as well as why you were ambushed. It was because the Intis ambassador had information about Zriel's superior, which was why he didn't pay much attention to the urgent communication method inscribed on the inside of the tooth. Zriel's report to his superior directly led to his demise." Ian fell into a daze when he heard that. It took him quite a while before he clenched his fists in anger, trying hard to compose himself as he said, "I didn't think of that." "You really are an excellent detective." He quietly let out a breath of air and changed the topic. "I have divulged the whereabouts of the manuscript to MI9 and everything else. They also mentioned your predicament in passing. They didn't suspect me of lying, nor did they send anyone to watch me. All of them went to vie for the manuscript. However, with that kind of pressure, no one can lie." Having said that, Ian stood up and gave a deep bow. "Please allow me to apologize again. Sorry to have involved you in this. Actually, you don't need to hide anything from me." Having understood the entire situation, Klein smiled and said, "No, the main problem in this matter was because I made a mistake that made me end up in my current situation." As he was listening, he used Ian's description of the entire situation and his reflections of the past few days and confirmed that he had made 2 mistakes. "When I discovered that Ian's matter ran deeper than it appeared, I still accepted the request. That wasn't a problem since I only felt that it involved gangs, and there would be, at most, 1 or 2 Beyonders who wouldn't dare expose themselves. But the divination lacked enough information and ended with a failure. This was within the limits of what I could have resolved by myself, and typically speaking, there wouldn't have been any trouble. I could even take the opportunity to come into contact with Backlund's Beyonders. After finding Zriel's corpse and confirming that the matter ran deep, I should have considered the sensitivity of my identity and decisively extricated myself from this case. I should have let Ian deal with the subsequent matters himself. This wouldn't be problematic and would be a rather careful choice. One of the mistakes I made was that I didn't flinch or reveal anything about Ian when Massault came to me. I only thought that he was from a gang, and that there were some Beyonders behind that gang. Who would have guessed that it would involve a figure like the Intis ambassador? Even more so, I never expected Massault to be so rash. After failing his mission, he didn't threaten, intimidate me or proceed with other options. Instead, he came straight to kill me so that mediumship could be performed. He didn't even give me the chance to regret my decision. As a result, my situation worsened. So, this isn't too subjective or too serious a mistake. The one mistake that really caused me to be in such a passive situation was a tiny mistake I made from the very beginning. I had rented the house and accepted the mission as Sherlock Moriarty without donning a disguise. This resulted in me not being able to flee after my identity as a Beyonder was exposed to the ambassador. Even as I acted horrified and frantic, making MI9 and the police department believe that my taking flight would only be normal, I didn't dare flee. I was afraid that when the ambassador failed to find a target for revenge, he would inform the officials about me. And according to my experience as a Nighthawk, most official enforcers like the Nighthawks, machinery hive mind, and mandated punishers harbor animosity towards uncontrolled Beyonders. They definitely wouldn't ignore me just because I'm a low-sequence Beyonder and would begin an investigation. In time, my looks will be clear evidence. I will then be pursued by high-sequence Beyonders from the Church of the Goddess because I resurrected despite having been involved with a Grade 0 sealed artifact. There's no chance for such matters to be suddenly forgotten or thought of as nothing by others. I had to plan for the worst-case scenario in advance, and if I only reacted when the ambassador took action, it would definitely be too late. Whether it's an assassination, finding a bodyguard, or buying items, all of them will require time. Only if the ambassador and his assistant dies or attention is diverted to the investigation of his death will I be able to resolve this latent danger. His assistant doesn't have an official status, so he can't interact with the officials. For a mere sequence 9 or sequence 8 at best, someone whose whereabouts are unknown, there's no reason to go through the effort to report me. Of course, his death is the best outcome, then there won't be any latent danger. Compared to finding Mr. Azek for help or having attention placed on me because of 0-08 again, as well as being pursued by high-sequence beyonders, assassinating the ambassador is the relatively simpler choice. Even if it fails, I can only bear one of the two outcomes. Sigh, everything originated from a small oversight at the beginning. I just imagined that in a metropolis with over 5 million people and few people knowing me while I deliberately avoided the Nighthawks, there was no need for me to don a disguise every day, since it would be easier for others to notice something amiss. Yet, for such a small mistake, I would have to pay over 10,000 gold pounds as the price without having any guarantee of resolving it. I'm really like a clown, with one mistake triggering a chain reaction, only to result in a desperate attempt to balance myself so as to please the audience. This is all because of my lack of experience. This is the first time in my 2 lifetimes combined that I've ever been a fugitive. Once this matter is completely resolved, exposing my identity as a beyonder would no longer be that dangerous. They would only think that I obtained a potion while finding a bodyguard and not doubt my origins. Of course, I'll have to get used to wearing glasses and a mustache in the future so that the people around me will gradually get used to my new image. In the future when they ask me about me, they will only think of this new image. Having thought through the entire matter, Klein's laugh became more pronounced, making Ian feel strange. It's time for me to leave. I'll need to disappear for a while, otherwise, I might be thrown into jail. Ian put on his hat, bade farewell, and left. Klein didn't stop him, watching him disappear into the crimson moonlight, while the woman by the oriel window had disappeared without him realizing it. Chapter 248, Waiting from both sides. With both sides being aware of the whereabouts of Helmasun's manuscript, this matter would come to an end tonight. Therefore, the ambassador would have the freedom to take revenge. Is this the reason for the impending danger? Klein gained a rough understanding of the divination results and the inexplicable omen. If he didn't have the language of foulness charm or the powerful bodyguard that cost him 1,000 pounds for 3 days, he would have shamelessly gone to the police station or the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery's headquarters in Backlund, St. Hireland Cathedral for a temporary stay. He could avoid any possible attacks and await the assassination of the ambassador. As for how successful the assassination would be, Klein wasn't confident either. He had already considered the worst outcome and had a plan for it. But now, with double the preparations, he no longer wanted to avoid it. He would stay at home and pretend that he knew nothing. Deep down, he was even looking forward to having his attackers come knocking at his door. Sequence 9 Hunter Massault was killed by me. If they send someone else again, they would at least be a sequence 7, or even a sequence 6 or 5. They might even come in numbers, but regardless, as long as I finish them, I'll obtain formulas and beyonder characteristics. I can then make up for some of my losses. Yes, I'll tell Miss Bodyguard that I had good luck and managed to benefit from the black year that I bought and became a beyonder. After all, when the battle becomes intense, there's no way to hide it at that point. Besides, what I'm saying is nearly the truth. I did benefit quite significantly from the black year. As Klein considered what would soon follow, he almost instinctively drew the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. May the goddess bless me that the beyonder who comes is the one from the seer pathway. He prayed silently. As he thought of this, he looked around the room for his bodyguard. He was worried that she would run away without a sound after hearing the whole story. The lights in the dining room were warm, illuminating the coffee table, sofa, and chairs. There was no one else in the room except him. As Klein gradually grew nervous, he suddenly saw a face appear on the glass cover of the gas lamp in the living room. The face was pale, with pale gold hair and delicate looks. This lady is quite confident in her own strength. Klein's mind calmed down, and he whispered to himself, I'm also a beyonder. I made a gamble on an item I bought from Kaspers's gathering and benefited from it, but it was only beneficial for me. What he said was true. No matter what method he had to face, these sentences would endure a truth test. But when these two sentences were put together, one would think that the benefits made him a beyonder. The face on the glass cover nodded slightly and quickly disappeared without any other reaction. Klein's expression didn't seem to change, but he secretly exhaled in his heart. Without taking off his coat, he went back to the sofa and picked up a newspaper and started reading. After a while, the tinkling sound echoed again. Someone had rung his doorbell again. Who is it? Klein immediately tensed up. He stuffed his hands into his pockets, touching his tarot cards and language of foulness charm. He slowly walked towards the door, and with the help of his abilities as a clown, he predicted what he would see after opening the door. The crimson moon was still faintly visible, the elegant gas lamps were unchanged, and a sergeant in a black and white checkered uniform with 3 chevrons on his epaulets was impatiently waiting by the door. He had a short, brown beard and he was none other than the sergeant who had dealt with Sherlock Moriarty's case of self-defense. I think Jurgen mentioned his name. Sergeant Faxine. Well, I can receive the £10 bail tomorrow or the next day. What is he doing here? Did MI9 send him to find Ian Wright? Or to inform me that I should temporarily hide away from danger? Confused, Klein grabbed the handle. Inside the Intis embassy of Backlund's West Borough, the lights were on. The scent of various perfumes and alcohol, accompanied by melodious melodies, stretched out to every corner. A ball was being held. During his years as an ambassador, Bakerland had often held balls at the embassy, inviting the kingdom's bankers, big factory owners, philanthropists, and other well-known, rich and powerful people, as well as lawyers. Random opportunities were also given to some of the lower-ranked merchants. In this atmosphere, he would tell the guests about the prosperity and openness of Trier, and how the Intis Republic was no longer dominated by the likes of the nobles, bankers, factory owners, and lawyers. They, directly and indirectly, took over a large portion of the parliamentary seats, determining the direction of the government policies, enjoying true freedom and high statuses. Today, Bakerland was doing the same thing. With a wine glass in hand, he flitted around the guests, as if to prove that he was present at the ball without leaving. They should have gotten the manuscript by now. After learning that Ian Wright appeared at the telegraph office from that trembling detective, I've been putting plans into action. Now is the time to reap the rewards. Bakerland, with his thin but classy face, took a sip of the blood-like Ormer wine and headed for the balcony, intending to take a breath of the cool night air. After learning that Ian had sent the telegram, as a veteran conspiracist and professional intelligence officer, Bakerland was acutely aware that Ian was contacting his superior's superior. Therefore, he quickly made the double spy, that had infiltrated the Fasak Empire's Backlund intelligence team, investigate and obtain the meeting time, location, and manner agreed upon by Ian and the team leader. After that, he pretended that nothing had happened and continued to send people to look for Ian near Bacardi Street. He successfully found Ian and also attracted the attention of MI9. According to his plan, his intelligence officer had deliberately let Ian go, so that MI9 would think that they were on the same starting line. After paralyzing his main opponent, he called in other unexposed intelligence agents to ambush Ian and the Fasak Empire's team leader. He wanted to find the manuscript and smuggle it out of the Lone Kingdom without being detected by the MI9. The situation had progressed as smoothly as he had expected, but the news that came back in the evening left his heart heavy. People from MI9 had actually appeared. They had appeared despite being supposedly fooled. With Rosago around, it's definitely not because of divination. Besides, MI9 isn't good at divination at all. That means we have a spy among our ranks. Let's hope that Rosago can be one step ahead of them and grab the manuscript to hand over to Shadow for extraction. Bakerland had deliberately organized the ball in order to avoid suspicion, but as such, he was unable to involve himself with the developments. All he could do was pray that his subordinates would amount to something. According to his plans, once Rosago succeeded, he would immediately transfer the items to another intelligence officer, one that had never been activated before. Then Rosago would lure MI9 away and, by creating some trouble, keep them out of sight and distract them from his partner. During this process, Bakerland requested Rosago to kill the detective while he was at it. If it wasn't for him, no one from MI9 would have known about it. Everything would have gone smoothly. My involvement with this Manger gang wouldn't have been revealed, and I wouldn't be transferred back to the country. He actually didn't run away, thinking that MI9 would keep protecting him, and that staying at home is safer than running away. Bakerland rubbed his face. He had already received orders that after the operation regarding the manuscript had been completed, and he would hand all intelligence matters to the highest-ranking military officer at the embassy and await the arrival of the new ambassador. Bakerland was rather reluctant to part with Backlund. Despite the bad weather and heavy pollution, Backlund was one of the most prosperous cities in the world. Besides, the ladies here are more conservative, unlike those sluts back home. Slowly seducing them into bed and removing their restraint, bit by bit, is a very satisfying and fascinating achievement. Unfortunately, I have to bid farewell to these beautiful ladies. Bakerland thought gloomily, and he felt more and more resentful of the detective who dared to put up resistance. As for Rosago's own safety, Bakerland wasn't worried at all. He believed that as long as Rosago wanted to, as long as he wasn't targeted by a high-sequence Beyonder, he would be able to escape immediately. This was because Rosago had special Beyonder powers. As he lost himself in thought, Bakerland's eyes suddenly lit up. He saw a young lady in a crimson dress standing at the edge of the balcony with a glass of wine in her hand. She had a pretty face and a gentle temperament. Her hair was ink black and luxuriant, and her light brown eyes seemed to speak volumes. Bakerland went over at once and began to chat with her. He learned that the lady was the daughter of a timber merchant named Eileen, and that her father wasn't very rich and was trying to make his way up the ranks. With his status as Intis ambassador, Bakerland quickly received Eileen's affection. After sharing 2 dances, their bodies became more intimate. "Beautiful lady, I'd like to invite you to my room to sample some Ormer wine of 1286. Eileen replied, almost without any hesitation, "All right." The two of them left the ballroom and secretly went to the 2nd floor. They entered Bakerland's room, and he ordered the guards to stay away from them and not to disturb him. Before the so-called Ormer wine 1286 appeared, Bakerland had passionately brought Eileen to the bed. While romping around in bed, Eileen's simple skirt came undone as her pure, fair arms hugged him. While her hands gripped Bakerland's shoulders, her nails and veins suddenly sprouted black, thin, fluffy spider feet. Bang! Eileen's eyes suddenly bulged as white foam poured out of her mouth. Bakerland retracted the fist that he had used to hit her abdomen and stood up from the bed. He no longer had the hasty actions from before and instead, wore a cold expression. "Who sent you?" Bakerland asked in a deep voice. Eileen attempted to stand up, but the pain was too much to bear. Her eyes were filled with shock and fear. Seeing the expression on the pretty girl's face, Bakerland smiled and said, "It's true that I'm into beautiful ladies, but I know this problem of mine. So, every time I meet a beautiful lady, I'm especially careful. Speak, who sent you? Don't bother resisting. I'm very good at using fire." Chapter 249, The Assassination. Eileen clamped her mouth shut and angrily looked at the thin, smiling face of the ambassador, with a touch of terror. Bakerland stretched out his right hand, which was covered in a plume of orange flames that danced silently. He took 2 steps forward, making a gesture as if he was pressing his palm against Eileen's skin. This made Eileen think of the descriptions in many novels in which cruel interrogators would use red-hot iron to brand their target's body, bringing about an extremely painful experience. "No, I can't be that brutal to such a beautiful lady. Bakerland suddenly stopped his outstretched right palm and chuckled softly. He shook suddenly, turning the orange flame into a long red whip. The long whip ignited the air around it, which took on the form of thorns. Pow! Bakerland lashed his flaming whip at Eileen, burning her clothes and leaving a dark mark on her skin. Her face contorted as she screamed. Who sent you? Bakerland asked again in a gentle voice. Eileen's lips quivered a few times before she finally opened them. It was, as Bakerland subconsciously listened for the answer, his eyes suddenly turned bloodshot. Oh no! Bakerland jerked back and rolled to the ground. In the spot where he had been standing, a flame rose up and formed a wall of fire. Splat! 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 Rain like blood and flesh splattered against the wall and produced sizzling sounds. Some of them penetrated the flame, leaving a thin trail of blood on the ground. At the end of this path was the Intis ambassador, Bakerland, who had stood up once again. He saw that Eileen's abdomen had been torn open and two arms wrapped in viscous liquid were sticking out from inside. With a sudden push of the two arms, a figure drilled its way out from the belly of the beautiful Eileen. It was covered in a thick, squirming blood-red liquid that continuously dripped down, and it was about the size of an adult male. It was hard to imagine that a normal woman like Eileen, with no protrusion in her abdomen, would actually have such a thing hidden inside her body. How was it stored in there? Boom! The body below Eileen's head exploded completely, turning into pure flesh and blood, surging into the form of a humanoid figure, and mixing with the dripping liquid to turn into a strange red robe. The figure revealed its true appearance. It was so beautiful that it looked like a woman. The blood-red robe it wore looked like a blossoming flower under the illumination of the flames. Rose Bishop. As a veteran intelligence officer, Bakerland immediately identified the name of the corresponding sequence before him. Sequence 6 of the secret suppliant pathway, Rose Bishop. Every Rose Bishop was an expert when it came to flesh and blood magic. Beyonders at this sequence could hide inside the bodies of others, thereby avoiding all sorts of investigations. But the moment they emerge, the hosts would lose their lives. For the Lord. Eileen's remaining head let out a low cry and closed her eyes forever. The Rose Bishop stretched out its right hand and tapped its chest 4 times in the order of bottom to top, right to left. With the color of blood and the light from the flames reflecting in his eyes, he looked at Bakerland and took a sudden step forward with his right foot, passing through the wall of fire. He didn't receive any damage from the fire, with only dark red liquid that continuously dripped down. Bakerland retreated once again as he suddenly raised his voice. Someone! Help me! Although his most capable assistant, Rosago, and several intelligence agents had been sent on a mission, there was still no lack of Beyonders in the embassy. They were military officials who had received permission from the Lone Kingdom. They were the defensive forces that were available. 1 Sequence 5, 1 Sequence 6, 3 Sequence 7s, and a combination of nearly 10 Sequence 8s and 9s. Bakerland's voice echoed around the room, but it didn't exit the premises. The music outside didn't stop and the ball continued. It was as though the room had become a completely isolated world. Bakerland stopped his shouting, narrowed his eyes, and looked around. The Rose Bishop was in no hurry to act. He said with a chuckle, "It was by your own will, the rules that were decided by yourself. You told the guards not to disturb you or come near, or let anyone close. Yes. I simply magnified your will and rules and made a slight distortion. If you want to escape this isolation, you have to defeat yourself." Bakerland's expression changed slightly. What appeared to be the compliance of rules was, in fact, a distortion of them. The characteristic of using the power of authority to serve oneself made him think of another sequence's name. Baron of Corruption. Bakerland growled. This was the Lawyer Pathway, which was Sequence 6 of the Dark Emperor Pathway. Before he could finish his sentence, Bakerland's face suddenly turned extremely gloomy as he blurted out, shepherd. You're a shepherd. Who are you from the Aurora Order? Mr. A. Why are you assassinating me? The Rose Bishop, no, shepherd chuckled. You don't need to know who I am. Accept the Lord's blessings. His body suddenly stiffened before he could finish his sentence. It was as though his joints were covered in rust, and he seemed to have turned into a puppet. Bakerland laughed rapturously. The gloominess from before disappeared in an instant. He took out a white handkerchief from his left breast pocket and wiped the corner of his mouth. I'm glad that you were able to chat with me for so long. It gave me enough time. After the white handkerchief was taken away, a thumb-sized head emerged from his left breast pocket. It was the head of a puppet with completely black eyes. The shepherd opened his mouth and was about to speak when he heard a hollow voice that seemed to come from afar. You, after pausing, his body suddenly burgeoned, and his skin turned dark. Two curved goat horns with strange, sinister patterns sprouted from his head, as well as wings behind his back that reeked of sulfur when they flapped. The shepherd instantly moved 3 meters forward, having transformed into a devil-like creature. But even so, it was as if every one of his joints was firmly shackled. His movements were stiff and slow, and his thoughts were starting to blur. You still have the power of the devil? As expected of a shepherd, let me send you to your lord. Without further ado, a flaming long spear with a blazing white tip materialized in the middle of Bakerland's right palm. He bent his back, about to throw the spear to pin the shepherd to the wall and burn him to ashes. Sequence 7 Pyromaniac of the Conspiracist Pathway had the ancient name, Fire Mage. Cough. 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 At that moment, Bakerland began to cough violently, coughing so hard that he felt as if he was about to spit out his heart and lungs. His flaming spear lost control from his coughing and disappeared, inch by inch. His face flushed red and his forehead was scorching hot from his coughing fit. His influence on his enemy, that he derived from a mystical item, was lifted. The shepherd was freed from his sluggishness and returned to normal. Why do you think I was having such a long chat with you? How does severe pneumonia and an unstoppable cough feel like? The devilish face asked with the corners of his mouth hooked. Upon hearing these words, Bakerland suddenly recalled the enemy's beautiful and enchanting appearance when he first appeared, and regretfully said, Cough. Cough. A disease. You. Cough. Cough. Killed a. Cough. 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 A demoness of affliction. The shepherd dispelled his devil-like form as his figure turned into a series of stacked afterimages. He chuckled and said, No, I only received a gift from Saint Tenebris. I know conspiracists have all sorts of means available to them, so, I'll be using my strongest ability now, so that you won't have any unnecessary hope. A book appeared before him, a translucent and blurry book. The ancient book flipped rapidly and with a soft chant, I came, I saw, I record. As long as I have recorded it, I'll be able to use it once. This is an ability that Saint Tenebris had deliberately demonstrated to me. Although I only have half of its original effect, it's still enough. The shepherd's voice turned hollow, and his body was enveloped by the darkness that spewed out from the book. He quickly turned into a small giant, about 4 meters tall. His entire body was covered in cold, black armor. At the space where his eyes should be, there were 2 glowing crimson-red blobs. The Dark Knight raised a broadsword in his hands, took a step forward, and delivered an unrelenting chop. No. Why? As Bakerland tragically screamed, the layers of flames that gushed out of his body were split apart. All sorts of lights exploded and were split open, and his body was split into 2 halves. Thud. Bakerland fell to the ground. No blood came out of his massive wound. Even his soul seemed to be corroded and destroyed by the black sword that didn't seem to exist. Boom. 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 The plumes of fire that spewed out of Bakerland's body lost control, causing the blast that shook the room and sent the glass rattling. And at that moment, the isolation that had been created by his own will vanished with his death. The shepherd didn't stop, nor did he wait for the Beyonder characteristic to appear. He restored his inconspicuous appearance and seized the opportunity before the military officials of the embassy arrived, sprinting through the layers of walls and into the darkness outside. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein paused with his right hand on the handle. He decided to throw a coin before he opened the door. Since Ian had already come, the revelation that he had seen in the dream had already happened. That meant that danger could come at any moment. While muttering the words, "The visitor outside will bring danger," Klein flicked up a quarter pence and watched it fall to his palm, its number side facing up. Negative. Klein muttered to himself as he reached for the handle. However, he didn't let his guard down. He knew that there was a mid-sequence Beyonder of the same pathway as him on the ambassador's side who could interfere with his divination. If it was that person, it would be normal for him to get the wrong result. It's a pity that I don't have the time or an opportunity to investigate it above the gray fog. Klein looked through the door for a moment with his spirit vision. Realizing that nothing was amiss, he opened the door and took 2 steps back. Dressed in a black and white checkered uniform, Sergeant Faxine took off his hat and said with a serious expression, "I've been sent by the higher-ups to tell you that you must be careful tonight and tomorrow. Be careful of strangers." Chapter 250, Rich Experience in Courting Death, All right. Klein nodded solemnly. Sergeant Faxine touched his short hair and said, "There are other arrangements. I'll explain them to you in detail, and you can decide on your own." He cast his gaze towards the living room. Klein made a polite gesture of invitation, then watched as Sergeant Faxine closed the door behind him, walked over to the sofa, and sat down. "What are your plans?" Klein kept his coat on, hands still in his pockets. Faxine leaned forward slightly, clasped his hands, and said, "You should be well aware that you have offended that ambassador. Tonight or tomorrow will be the most dangerous period for you. The higher-ups have given you 3 choices. The first is to go to the Holy Wind Cathedral for 2 days. I know that you're a believer of the god of steam and machinery, but St. Hireland Cathedral is too far, and it's easy for trouble to arise on the way there." Klein nodded indiscernibly and waited for the sergeant to give him the second choice. Suddenly, his vision blurred and his head went numb. He felt as if there was a layer of thick glass around him. He saw that Sergeant Faxine's opening and closing of his mouth was slowing down, and he noticed that his thoughts had become sluggish. This feeling was very familiar. Klein suddenly thought of the puppet from the Antigonus family, sealed artifact 2-049. Back then, he was repeatedly affected in a similar way, but he had been awakened by Captain Dunn Smith and the others. To ensure that the others could detect any abnormalities in a timely manner, they kept stretching and retracting their arms. The Antigonus family holds the seer pathway. This person's ability is similar to the Antigonus family's puppet. He is the mid-sequence Beyonder of the seer pathway. As expected, it's him. Klein came to his senses, but there was no Dunn Smith to wake him. The muscles on Officer Faxine's face started squirming. Soon, he turned into a gentleman with black hair and blue eyes. He had a handsome face and a tiny stubble. He said with a smile, "Given time, this is one of the most difficult abilities to deal with for anyone that isn't a high-sequence Beyonder." As he spoke, Klein saw the image of the woman in the black regal dress appear in the glass of the oriel window. She walked slowly and stiffly out of the glass. Her blonde hair, her delicate face, and her pale face made her seem more like a doll than a living person. "I never thought that you would be able to hire such a powerful bodyguard. If it wasn't for my divination ahead of time, I might have died here. What kind of compensation did you pay? By the way, my name is Rosago." Rosago didn't look back as he continued smiling at Klein, but he didn't expect a fluent answer from the man he controlled. At that moment, he suddenly felt a cold breeze blow across his neck, causing his hair to stand on end as goosebumps appeared all over his body. There seemed to be an invisible person at his back, breathing down his neck. Rosago laughed, raised his left hand, and snapped his fingers. Pow! Flames suddenly soared up from his back, and a transparent shadow was set ablaze, quickly turning into ashes. In Klein's vision, these motions were all broken down into a grid of images. This wasn't because his opponent had turned slow, but was a result of his increasingly sluggish thoughts. He already has me under control. Why isn't he directly killing me? Do all villains like to engage in lengthy monologues? No, he's not stupid. He's trying to conceal something with this discussion. Klein tried to think, to figure out the problem, but his thoughts were moving at an irresistibly slow pace. He looked intently at Rosago, taking in every detail of his. Finally, he saw a figure in each of Rosago's eyes, a figure with blonde hair, blue eyes, a pale face, and a dark black Gothic regal dress. And at this moment, the woman was still behind Rosago. She was still near the oriel window, walking towards him like a manipulated puppet. He hasn't really controlled her yet. She's still trying to resist and struggle. They are tussling in the realm of mystery. I need to do something. I need to tip the scales of balance. Klein turned his attention to the language of foulness charm he was holding in his left hand. It was cold and slippery, filled with evil. He was glad that he hadn't let down his guard and maintained a battle-ready state the entire time. He could only injure himself to injure his opponent. Klein gathered his strength and struggled to speak. His vocal cords seemed to have rotted, and his throat squirmed in difficulty. He hoarsely said in ancient Hermes with a staccato rhythm, "Foulness." As his voice echoed in the air, Klein felt a corrosive pain in his left palm, and he heard illusory whispers that could drive a person mad. This was a state that he was familiar with, and it didn't affect his subsequent attempts. The attempt was to inject most of his spirituality into the language of foulness charm, which didn't require the control of his body. In 3 seconds, the voice of the true creator would descend upon the physical world and burrow into the ears of the creature closest to him. 3. The prelude, the din, the illusory, the evil whispers spread out in an instant. Klein felt his scalp tingle, his mind abuzz, his veins throbbing. He found it difficult to focus his mind. A coffee table away from him, Rosago's expression had suddenly turned adrift. His face swelled up as the woman's figure in his eyes suddenly became clearer. 2. The pale woman in the black regal dress behind him quickened her actions, but soon, she frowned in pain. At this moment, Klein felt the weakening of the influence as he wished, regaining his smooth thought processes, and felt as though his joints were once again filled with lubricant. Having experienced ravings all this time, he endured the madness and pain, quickly pulling out and throwing the language of foulness charm from his left palm at Rosago. 1. The iron-black charm, with its many symbols and sinister-looking patterns, melted. Rosago had just regained some of his composure and was trying to leap to the side when he saw a rich darkness and heard a murmur that contained immense knowledge and extreme madness. No human being was able to describe such a sound. All the veins in Rosago's head protruded as if they were about to explode. He tumbled to the ground, writhing and struggling as his skin ruptured, inch by inch, revealing the flesh underneath. At the same time, Klein and the blonde woman with blue eyes also failed to resist the pain as they fell to the ground. Each of them let out tragic screams. The excruciating pain felt like someone had stabbed their temples with a drill rod. Their eyes turned bloodshot as red liquid ran down their noses. They could neither see nor feel the outside world. The experienced Klein was the first to recover. He staggered to his feet and saw that Rosago had torn off his clothes and stripped off his skin, exposing his flesh and veins. He was like a legendary red monster that had been skinned. He constantly tumbled around the ground while groaning in pain, as if he was about to lose control. Klein didn't wait for the result, because he couldn't afford the possibility of the other party gaining the benefits, as well as becoming a devotee of the true creator. He believed that the evil god was definitely infuriated as well. Pulling out his revolver and adjusting the barrel to the firing position, Klein took 2 steps forward, circled around the coffee table, and put the muzzle of his gun against Rosego's head. Bang! 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 Dressed in his black double-breasted suit, he stared at his enemy intently as he shot 5 rounds in a row, watching his enemy's head swell and explode into a mixture of red, white, and black that splattered all over the floor. "Captain, thank you for demonstrating this to me before." Klein panted while he lowered his revolver before he beamed brightly. In front of him, Rosego's headless corpse faltered a little before collapsing to the side of the sofa. Only then did the woman in the black Gothic regal dress stop her screams. Her struggles and rolling slowed down, but her skin seemed to turn a lot more translucent. Seeing the flesh on Rosego's corpse squirm, Klein didn't hesitate to use his self-created requiem charm. Under the calm and serene atmosphere, the corpse finally stopped moving. Upon seeing this scene, Klein thought of something. He took out another charm and chanted in a low voice, "Crimson." Then, he injected some of his spirituality into it and threw this charm at his bodyguard, the woman with the pale golden hair and pale white face. As the slumbering powers emanated, the woman who was still weakened under the effect of the lingering voices instantly quietened down as she fell into a deep slumber. Just to be sure, Klein threw another slumber charm, afraid that he would be interrupted during what he was planning to do next. 15 Minsk Street once again had its peace. This time, nothing was broken, only the ground was contaminated, as the fight between the 3 parties was mystical and beyond the physical realm. Looking at Rosego's corpse and then at his sleeping bodyguard, Klein mocked himself, "It's also good to court death often. At least I gained some immunity." He didn't attempt the mediumship ritual immediately because Rosego was now tainted by the true creator, and directly communicating with the spirit was tantamount to committing suicide. But that didn't mean Klein had no choice. He planned on doing the mediumship above the gray fog by bringing Rosego with him. With his current spirit body's level, even with the augmentation provided by Azek's copper whistle, he was unable to move a portable camera, much less a corpse that was several times heavier. However, mediumship wasn't done with a corpse, but the channeling of the remnant spirituality. Klein took out a candle, quickly set up a ritual ceremony, summoned himself, and responded to himself, turning into a special spirit body. After becoming a spirit, he saw the distinct remnants of Rosego's spirituality, and he realized that Miss Bodyguard's physical condition was a little strange. She was actually in quite a similar state as he was, but there were also great differences. Without wasting any time thinking, Klein carried Azek's copper whistle, wrapped the remaining of Rosego's spirituality, and entered above the gray fog. After conjuring the appropriate ritual items and setting up a simple altar, Klein quickly began the mediumship ritual. During this process, he was shocked to discover that he no longer needed to pray to anyone to be able to directly communicate with the spirit. It was like he was a real spirit medium. Phew! Is this some special power that I possess in the mysterious space above the gray fog? A thought flashed through Klein's mind as he began to recite the divination statement. The potion formulas for the seer pathway. Chapter 251, Gains, the potion formulas for the seer pathway. Klein leaned back in his chair and tried to communicate with the spirit via dream divination. In a gray illusory world that didn't seem surreal, a gas lamp suddenly lit up, illuminating the stone slabs on the ground and a desk with a goatskin scroll placed on top of it. After the seer and clown formulas appeared one after the another, Rosego stood there with a fur shirt, listening to a voice of unknown origins. Before the advancement, I have to warn you that you've been too reliant on divination. Divination is a revelation, a result, it is unable to tell us the process. For example, you might decide to invest all your money because your divination says that a railway stock can make money. But in fact, what that revelation really means is that in the long run, in 30 years, the railway stock will make money, and before that, it will fall more than it rises. Fate isn't so easy to master, and there are many times when it's impossible to quantify it. Divination isn't all-powerful. In addition, divination can be interfered with and cause you to be misled. There are too many things in this world that cannot be understood. If you completely rely on divination, then you'll definitely die because of it. Divination is a revelation. It must be combined with one's own carefulness, caution, and self-control. Rosago was unable to divine the corresponding danger because the language of foulness was involved with the mysterious space above the gray fog, and that led to him dying at my hands. Otherwise, with his mystical abilities, it would have been difficult for Miss Bodyguard and I to escape today. This is also a reminder for me. Even if I had the gray fog to isolate all interferences, I cannot afford to be careless. No matter how certain my actions are, I need to leave some leeway. From these words, it seems like they aren't aware of the acting method. Otherwise, some of those words could be directly summed up as being respectful and fearful of fate. As his thoughts raced, Klein heard Rosago's reply as he unfurled the parchment. Sequence 7. Magician, main ingredients, 1 true root of a mistreant, all the spinal fluid of a dark-patterned black panther. Supplementary ingredients, 60 ml of purified water, 30 ml of mist trench juice, 3 grams of droplet gem powder, 4 drops of fantasy grass essential oil. Magician. This is also part of a circus. It can form the foundations of a circus with seers and clowns. Klein first lampooned before he recalled the suited clown that he had encountered before. From the looks of it, he was a magician. His abilities seemed to include firing air bullets, the ability to fire air bullets, flaming jumps, and drawing slips of paper as weapons. Not bad. Just being able to cast spells quickly can greatly increase my battle prowess. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein saw the scene before him change. This time it was a splendid room, surrounded by golden statues and ornaments. It was the same voice from before, but it reminded Rosago of the same thing. According to my experience, after you consume the faceless potion, you have to remember this point: you can disguise yourself into anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. Faceless? Sequence 6 of the Seer Pathway is Faceless Man. This should be the Beyonder power that allowed Rosago to transform into Officer Faxine. From the looks of it, the fake detective's reel was also played by him. Creeping hunger allowed Kalangos to transform into a person with different looks. This matches this Beyonder power. From the looks of it, some faceless died at his hand. Such a power cannot augment a person in a straight-up battle, but it's more useful than 90% of all Beyonder powers in many occasions. It's no wonder that Rosago dared to come and attempt to kill me, and wasn't afraid of falling into a trap. This power is of great significance to me. At this thought, Klein's eyes widened as he saw Rosago pick up a thin gold page with words written in Hermes. Sequence 6, Faceless, main ingredients, mutated pituitary gland of a thousand-faced hunter, characteristic of a human-skinned shadow. Supplementary ingredients, 80 ml of a thousand-faced hunter's blood, 5 drops of black jimsonweed juice, 10 grams of dragon tooth grass powder, 3 strands of hair from a deep-sea naga. Thousand-faced hunter. That seems to be a type of dragon, but not a particularly powerful kind. It shouldn't be a dragon of the spiritual system, but it's still extremely rare. It's almost extinct. Klein instantly recalled the corresponding mysticism knowledge. At this point, the scene before him didn't change, but Rosago's attire and location did. He wore a white wig, a dark tuxedo, and had a thick beard. This advancement is no longer as simple as before. The potions must be consumed in conjunction with a ritual. If you succeed, you'll obtain one of the most irresistible Beyonder powers beneath that of the high-sequence Beyonders. The speaker's voice had changed, turning into one that sounded even older. Having expected that, Rosago asked, "What's the ritual?" "Go to the sea, find a mermaid, and drink the potion while she's singing." The speaking old man opened an ancient book that depicted countless mysterious symbols in it. Suddenly, A ray of light flashed from the book's surface as lines of ancient Hermes appeared in midair. Sequence 5, Nimblewright Master. When Klein saw this, he suddenly had a headache. It was a signal that his spirituality was close to being drained. In the previous battle, just the language of foulness charm, alone, had consumed most of his spirituality. Later on, not only did he use 3 more charms from the Evernight goddess's domain, but he had also summoned himself and responded to himself. To hold out until now showed how much progress he had made compared to before, as well as the noticeable improvement in the digestion of the clown potion. The scene flickered and was on the brink of shattering. Klein held on and scanned the remaining content of the formula. Main ingredients: dust of ancient wraiths, core crystal of a 6-winged gargoyle. Supplementary ingredients: 80 milliliters of spring water from Sonia Island's Golden Spring, 10 grams of Drago bark, remnant spirituality of ancient wraiths, 1 pair of eyes from a 6-winged gargoyle. Advancement ritual: consume potion in the midst of a singing mermaid's song. Gotcha. Klein stopped holding out any longer as he allowed the dream to shatter into countless illusory specks of light that disappeared. He pinched his forehead, almost fainting. As the remnants of Rosego's spirituality and the hints of madness faded away, he was pushed back into the real world by an invisible force. The ground, stained with blood, brains, hair, and all sorts of fragments, entered Klein's vision. He bent over and retched a little, clearing his head a little. I'll be sent out of the mysterious space above the gray fog when I'm out of spirituality. Klein looked around and saw that Miss Bodyguard was still asleep. He hurriedly extinguished the candle, tidied up the items related to the ritual, and then panted heavily. After a while, he finally regained some of his spirituality. At that moment, a gust of cold wind blew at the back of his neck, causing him to shiver as his mind froze. Klein turned his head abruptly and looked at the oriel window again. He saw that Miss Bodyguard in her black Gothic regal dress had woken up and was floating in the air. Her pale blonde hair and pale face seemed to have diminished a little. Her entire person seemed less corporeal, to the point of her skin appearing somewhat transparent. Klein quickly explained according to the explanation he had thought of. After I blew his head off, I discovered that his body was still squirming. Because I was afraid he would come back alive, I quickly used all the charms on me. I was very nervous and panicked at the time. It might have affected you. This is probably the risk that the divination had revealed earlier. If she's not satisfied with the explanation and thinks that I attacked her, then I'm finished. Klein thought nervously. His true feelings made his performance even more perfect. Miss Bodyguard lowered her head and looked at herself, then asked with an unperturbed tone, "What charm was it at the beginning?" "I bought a black ear at the gathering for £400. I was told that I could hear the voice of a great existence, and that if I was lucky enough, I would benefit greatly. If I was unlucky, I would die on the spot. Back then, I couldn't get a bodyguard, and since I was in such danger, I could only take the gamble." The result was pretty good, Klein replied absolutely truthfully. When I heard the voice of the great existence, that black ear shattered by itself and turned into such a charm. Miss Bodyguard's blue eyes swept over him slowly. The room was silent, as if it was frozen. Finally, the lady in the black regal dress nodded. "You'd better find a psychiatrist." "Do you mean that I've become a potential lunatic?" "Yes, she has guessed that it was a relic of a listener, and she understands that Rosego's spirituality must have been tainted by the true creator. She wouldn't suspect that I had deliberately made her sleep to take that opportunity to perform a mediumship. It would also explain why I had gotten rid of the effects of the ravings faster than she did. After all, I'm a potential lunatic created by the true creator." Klein smirked. "Let's hurry up and clean up the scene. MI9 might come over to take a look." He pointed at Rosego's headless body. As he spoke, Klein put on a pair of gloves and squatted down to look for any relics. He quickly found more than £10 in cash, some essential oils and herbal powder, 2 crudely cut paper figurines, and a strange piece of paper. This piece of paper was orange in color, and on it were symbols corresponding to the sun. The magic emblem formed a blank rectangle, and just by holding it in his hand, he found it very warm and sedate. What is this? Klein didn't hide his puzzlement. Without him realizing it, Miss Bodyguard was already floating behind him. She answered simply, a mystical object corresponding to a notary. Notary? Klein was surprised at first, but he soon remembered that Rosago was an intelligence officer in the Intis Republic. People there believed in the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery. Similarly, the eternal blazing sun was also the god of deeds. This is the sequence 6 or sequence 5 of the Bard pathway. If the notarization is valid, the Beyonder powers will be temporarily enhanced. If the notarization is fake, the Beyonder powers will be forcefully dispersed. Miss Bodyguard didn't explain any further and gave a rough description of its use. Klein was about to say something when he saw an eerie glow emitting out of Rosago's headless body and bloody brain mush. They attracted each other to form a blob that transformed into a black, pupilless eye. Then, what is this? Klein asked again, feigning ignorance. Something worthless. Miss Bodyguard maintained her way of speaking. Worthless? Klein asked with a frown. He actually understood what Miss Bodyguard meant. Normally, if Rosago eventually lost control, he would leave behind a strange and terrifying sealed artifact. If he didn't, his Beyonder characteristic could be used as the main ingredient of a Nimblewright master. In short, it would be of great value. However, the problem was that he hadn't lost control but was also tainted by the true creator. Hence, it had become a potion's main ingredient that was branded by an evil god. Using it to concoct a Nimblewright master potion was equivalent to committing suicide by ingesting poison. Miss Bodyguard looked at the entirely black eye and said in a low and ethereal voice. It has been contaminated by an evil god. It has no value anymore. If it really is of value, and one that's very valuable, I would even worry that you'd finish me off in passing. Klein pointed at Rosago's remains and said, these are our common spoils of war. We'll each pick a few. You first. Miss Bodyguard shot him a glance. Without a word, she floated over and took the notary document. Just like I thought. In the future, I should find and learn the knowledge in mysticism to remove an evil god's contamination. Klein took out an iron cigarette case and bent down to pick up the black eye. Miss Bodyguard didn't stop, completely ignoring his words. Suddenly, Klein thought of something. He realized what he had overlooked as he quickly added, on the way back, go to the Rice police station, Sergeant Faxine's home, or search around Minsk Street for the clothes Rosago was originally wearing. Rosago came wearing a police uniform, and the powers of a faceless were obviously limited to himself, so where were his previous clothes? He couldn't have been wearing a police uniform all night. If MI9 and the police found Rosago's clothes nearby and realized that I'm not hurt, things would be a little tricky. Miss Bodyguard is an expert that's not considered a legal beyonder. For a normal detective to pay £1,000 to hire a bodyguard is enough to arouse suspicion. Klein kept thinking, trying to seal all the loopholes ahead of time. Just as he was about to use his divination ability to help Miss Bodyguard find Rosago's old clothes and return the missing uniform, Rosago's corpse paused and replied in a rusty voice, I know. She seems very confident. Oh right, Miss Bodyguard's state is between the physical body and the spirit body, and the principle behind divination is to travel the spirit world with an astral projection. Thus, she can rely on her instincts to divine. Having realized this, Klein didn't say another word. He handed the cartridge case to Rosago's corpse and watched it open the door, walk out, and close the door politely. The spoil of war that I chose is a beyonder characteristic contaminated by the true creator. I believe that no one would be able to divine it. Even if they did, they would feel the danger ahead of time and wouldn't dare to proceed with the divination. While thinking over the matter, Klein walked back to the sofa and sat down, feeling a lingering sense of fear. The battle had lasted no more than a minute, nor had it been fierce enough to destroy anything, but the ferocity and danger of it had been second only to what he had experienced when facing Megos and the baby in her womb. Even with the powerful Miss Bodyguard and the language of foulness, he had almost fallen under Rosego's control and killed without being able to put up a resistance. The ability of a Nimblewright master is very odd and very powerful. According to the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation, the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Rosego should include all of the main ingredients of the potion sequences 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. If it wasn't contaminated by an evil god, if it was matched with the supplementary ingredients, an ordinary person could instantly become a sequence 5 Beyonder. Of course, this kind of advancement method, one depending entirely on luck, has long been abandoned by history. It's the most primitive and most dangerous method. Advancing step by step according to the sequence is the best way that has been verified by the lives of countless predecessors. If I can get rid of the corruption of the true creator in the future, then I can also use the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Rosego when advancing from sequence 6 to sequence 5. The additional characteristics will only make me stronger, like the captain. As Klein recalled the past, he raised his hand to pinch his forehead. He turned to think about something more important. Rosego's appearance meant that the struggle for the manuscript had ended. Could his lack of charms have to do with him finishing all his charms in the battle? To come at such a critical juncture, it's likely he had the intention of diverting attention. MI9 probably didn't expect him to seek revenge so boldly under such circumstances. They didn't send anyone to monitor me and could only passively wait for Rosego to give them the signal. Rosego was Bakerland's assistant, and his actions should be directed only by Bakerland. After his death, as long as Bakerland is dead, there would be no more latent dangers left. I wonder if the assassination has begun or if it succeeded. Tonight, because of the battle over Helmasuin's manuscript, the powers defending Bakerland would be at its weakest. If it were me, I'd definitely not miss this opportunity. I'm sure Bakerland didn't think that someone would assassinate him. With nothing to do, Klein fished out a coin and, recited with a suppressed tone, Bakerland is already dead. Ding! The penny tumbled in the air and fell down into the palm of Klein's hand, head facing up. It meant a positive result. Bakerland is dead. The assassination was a success. Klein was overjoyed, his tensed-up nerves immediately relaxed. Without Rosego's interference, he believed that the result was correct. This matter has finally ended. Klein took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He leaned back slowly on the sofa and looked out of the window at the faint crimson moon amid his fatigue and relief. Inside the Intis Republic's embassy, 2 military officials were squatting beside Bakerland's body, examining the cause of his death. Their partners and their superior had already gone out, chasing in a bid to capture the assassin. However, everyone knew that it was already too late. There was no hope left. There's severe lung damage, suspected to be the result of a disease. An extremely strong fatal blow, one much stronger than all the sequence 5 Beyonder attacks I've ever seen, one of the military officials said in a low voice. Disease? On the floor and on the bed, there are obvious marks of flesh and blood magic on the ground and on the bed, but none on the wall. Besides, the commotion of the fight wasn't transmitted outside. Finally, with the lethal blow having the characteristics of corruption and obliteration, there are at least 4 unconnected Beyonder powers. Another military official stood up and began to describe the situation as if he was talking to himself. He suddenly stopped and looked at the other military official. They said in unison, "Shepherd." After a few seconds of silence, the squatting military official frowned and said, "It might be a group with at least 4 different Beyonders. Then, we'll wait to be judged. It's normal for us not to discover the infiltration of a single Rose Bishop, but how did the other 3 do it? It's impossible. The standing military official denied the guess as he hesitantly said, however, I have heard of another sequence that can create similar effects. I think it's called scribe. I don't know what pathway it is, nor do I know which organization it belongs. The squatting military official nodded and said, a shepherd is the prime suspect. The Aurora Order are a bunch of lunatics. It's nothing odd for them to do anything. Let's begin investigating the identity of the woman that seduced the ambassador. Damn it. The Lone Kingdom definitely won't permit our investigations. Those Aurora Order bastards are lunatics who deserve to be fucked by donkeys. The standing military official shook his head in frustration. They were bound to be punished for the ambassador's assassination. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein pretended as though nothing had happened. Putting up with his fatigue, he flipped through the papers. After about 20 minutes, he suddenly saw Miss Bodyguard, in her black regal dress and long, pale blonde hair, appear in the oriel window. Is it done? Klein subconsciously asked. Miss Bodyguard nodded slightly without a word. Phew. Klein thought for a moment before saying, thank you for your protection. This matter ends here. I'll pay you the remaining £900 in 2 days. As you know, there's a withdrawal limit. Or should I hand it over to Merrick? The pale-faced lady opened and closed her mouth, her voice seemingly ethereal as it echoed in the air. Just give it to me. I promise to protect you for 3 days, not just once. Lady, you really abide by the contract. However, this would be very inconvenient for me. Are you going with me to catch the adulterers in bed tomorrow? 3 days. Today is Thursday, and the protection would be over by Sunday afternoon. Yes, thankfully, it wouldn't affect the tarot gathering. Klein rubbed his forehead and said, all right. How should I address you? You don't need to know. Miss Bodyguard lifted her Gothic regal dress, bowed slightly, and disappeared from the oriel window. My second case after arriving at Backlund allowed me to get the next 3 potions formulas. Is that too much of a coincidence? Although this is in line with the revelation from my divination, Backlund contains the opportunities for me to become powerful. Isn't it too fast and simple? Simple doesn't refer to the difficulty, but rather to the degree of twists and turns in the matter. This matter was very difficult and dangerous, but it wasn't complex and appeared simple. According to my expectations, I would have gathered information regarding the secret order through Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and Miss Zio and her companion, and then I would catch the tail of this ancient organization. After numerous twists and turns, I would eventually obtain the formulas, and that would have taken at least 3 months. Who knew that I would have succeeded in less than 3 weeks? It can't be that it was arranged by someone again, right? Yes. Let me think through the circumstances again. It's no coincidence that the Intis Republic is related to the secret order. Emperor Roselle's diary has confirmed this circumstantially. The abilities of the seer and faceless are very suited for an intelligence organization. For a mid-sequence beyonder of a similar pathway to become the assistant of an intelligence czar like Bakerland is reasonable and normal. That's not a coincidence. The reason that the ambassador sent someone to take revenge on me likely has to do with him wanting to divert attention. Then, sending Rosago, who can most easily succeed and escape, is a choice with reduced risk. That's not surprising at all. It was quite normal for Ian to look for new detectives in the papers after none of the detectives he knew were willing to accept his mission of tracking down Zriel. There weren't many new detectives advertising on the papers at the time, and I was probably the only one. Well, I was the only one on the Backlund Bulletin. Just like what I've concluded previously, the problem with Massault was that he was too rash, and I was worried that it's not easy to disguise myself usually as it can end up attracting more attention. Therefore, I didn't try to disguise myself. Although these 2 possibilities, especially the former, has the probability of being influenced, it does match the corresponding person's personality, mentality, and origins. And this isn't the main point. This doesn't explain the problem of how my second case ended up involving a mid-sequence beyonder of the seer pathway. It was destined by fate. That doesn't feel right. Thinking ahead, after I transmigrated, the first and second case I found myself embroiled in was related to the seer pathway. Of course, it could be explained as an arrangement by 0-08. Right, the Antigonus family's notebook even corrupted the misfortune cloth puppet and showed me the complicated vertical I symbol that involves the Antigonus family's treasure. The reason I came up with back then was that with the termination of the Antigonus family's bloodline, it viewed me, a seer who had survived despite having interacted with it, as its inheritor. Now that I think about it, this reason is extremely trifling. What if I'm a devout believer of the Evernight goddess? However, I only made a guess at that time and didn't confirm it. The Antigonus family's treasure is obviously related to the seer pathway. Thinking deeper, why did I transmigrate? Why did I happen to possess Klein's body, and not anyone else? Back then, Klein had just proceeded with dark divination and was made to commit suicide by the Antigonus family's notebook. And that notebook is clearly related to the seer pathway. In addition, the first time I saw Roselle's diary, it had content that involved his regret of not choosing apprentice, marauder, or seer. That was very coincidental. From beginning to end, except for those parts involving 0-08, everything appeared to be in a mess. It doesn't seem like a conscious arrangement, but more like a kind of passive attraction, a mutual attraction, an attraction that has breaks between them. I attract things and items regarding the seer pathway, and at the same time, I'm attracted to them. It does seem odd thinking about it. This kind of attraction even directly influences fate, preventing even Mr. Azek from seeing through it. Is there some strange characteristic to me? And this characteristic allows me to resurrect a limited number of times? With this in mind, Klein suddenly had the impulse to go above the gray fog to perform a divination and confirm his ideas. But he quickly rejected this idea, not only because Miss Bodyguard might be watching in the mirror, but also because he believed that his greatest characteristic was the mysterious space above the gray fog. Therefore, it was obviously impossible for him to have an answer if he were to use it to divine about it. At least for now, there aren't any obvious signs of manipulation. It would be acceptable if it's just pure attraction. And I've already chosen a beyonder pathway, that cannot be changed until sequence 4, so I can only take things one step at a time. Right, I should be firm about not heading to the Hornacis mountain range to seek out the Antigonus family's treasure. Haha, I have a feeling that I would say how nice it is in the future when I actually do it. Klein silently made a self-deprecating remark as he felt his exhaustion gradually wash over him. His eyelids couldn't help but close. The last thought before he fell asleep was, I should participate in more Beyonder gatherings and gather the corresponding Beyonder ingredients for magician through Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and the Sun. I wouldn't reject anything for Faceless if they were available. In addition, I should obtain mystical items that have less severe negative effects. Before my digestion and increase in strength, it's best to have more life preservation abilities. Apart from this, investing, taking on jobs, saving up money, and attempts to look for Lenivus to use him as the starting point for my revenge, can also be considered a form of practice. Those were Klein's future plans. At 7 in the morning, he woke up as usual. It was still gloomy and hazy outside. Klein got up and walked to the door. As he passed by the full-length mirror, he saw that Miss Bodyguard had suddenly appeared. She wore the same black bonnet, her face was as pale as ever. Her voice pierced through the glass and slipped into Klein's ear in an ethereal fashion. Someone from MI9 came last night. I should say as expected, the police came late, but I still have to thank them for being late. Klein smiled and asked, they didn't find anything, right? In regards to the answer, he was very certain that if MI9 had discovered something, he wouldn't have been able to sleep undisturbed. No. Miss Bodyguard's figure faded and disappeared into the mirror. This ability of hers is very powerful. Even spirit vision can't detect her. Perhaps, she can be seen with Rosego's Beyonder characteristic. Find Miss Bodyguard through those hidden threads. Klein's mind stirred as he returned to the bed and took out the iron cigarette case from under his pillow. Just as he touched it, before he could even open it, a bone-piercing cold rushed at his neck. He felt his hairs stand on end, and his entire body trembled. Pow! His hand loosened and the iron cigarette case fell to the ground. This is a warning from Miss Bodyguard. Klein laughed dryly, pretending as though nothing had happened as he stuffed the iron cigarette case into his pocket. After washing up and putting on his clothes, he arrived at the first floor and took out the newspapers that he had subscribed to from his letterbox. Flipping open the Tussock Times, Klein saw the headline, Intis Ambassador to Backland Murdered. Terrorist organization, the Aurora Order, claims responsibility. The result is out so quickly. Besides, the Aurora Order had only accepted a job, so why would they claim responsibility? Yes. A terrorist organization needs to show off their stature and build up their image. Only then would they be able to attract enough fresh blood. This complements their secret preachings. Mr. A is very good. He should be a shepherd. Klein stood in the hallway, reading the news. According to the news, there was evidence of the Aurora Order's assault on Ambassador Bakerland. In the follow-up investigation, they found a letter deliberately left behind by the Aurora Order which claimed responsibility for it. At the end of the news, the reporter briefly introduced the Aurora Order and listed some of the illegal crimes that they had committed. Their fame instantly surpassed most of the secret organizations. Regardless, this matter had come to an end. Klein exhaled, turned his head to look out the window, and he saw a thin mist filling the air as a drizzle began pattering down. Shouldn't there be bright sunshine and sunny weather during such moments? Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. And now, he had to go out to catch some adulterers. Chapter 254, Various Parties in Empress Borough, the Opulent Villa of Count Hall. Audrey, with a white napkin covering her, watched as the dining maidservant cut her a piece of bacon, laid out 2 fully fried eggs, spread fruit jam on a piece of soft bread, and added sauce to some grilled mushrooms. In a true noble family, maidservants were divided into many categories. Apart from personal maids, there were maids for the different bedrooms, study room maids, activity room maids, guest room maids, dressing maids, shoe maids, jewelry maids, dining maids, laundry maids, and kitchen maids. They were strictly assigned to their own tasks, with one task handled by one maid. Although this was a great waste of manpower, for nobles, propriety was everything. Unless there was a large amount of debt, they would never reduce their requirements in such matters. Audrey took a sip of the brownish-red tea, allowing the faint scent of malt and rose slush in her mouth. At this moment, she heard her father, a member of Parliament of the House of Lords, the powerful banker, Count Hall, mumbling as he held a newspaper in his hands. The Aurora Order is really crazy. Aurora Order? Audrey blinked and asked curiously, what did they do? Oh, baby, you don't want to know. They assassinated the Intis ambassador, Bakerland. It does them no good. Count Hall shook his head as he flipped through the newspaper. Audrey's elder brother, the Count's eldest son, Hibbert Hall swallowed the grilled mushrooms in his mouth and expressed his opinion. Perhaps they want to destroy the relationship between the kingdom and Intis and let the war spread from the colonies to the northern continent. This child of noble birth had a handsome face and bright golden hair. He looked like a classical sculpture, regardless of which angle one viewed him from. No, if that was the case, then they wouldn't leave behind so much obvious evidence. Moreover, recently, the kingdom has too many new policies that will be implemented and will need some time to stabilize the environment, so we won't rashly start a war. What happened last night was already reported in the newspaper this morning, and the details of the events and the murderer are enough to explain the thoughts of His Majesty and the ministers. Count Hall directed his son. Audrey listened to her father and brother discuss the matter in a daze before realizing what had happened. Bakerland has been assassinated. Mr. A succeeded. He really is from the Aurora Order. The reason why he intentionally exposed that it was the Aurora Order who did it was to prove that he was the one who completed the task and that he hadn't cheated me out of my money. This is too fast and efficient. I only paid the first sum yesterday afternoon, and I'm hearing the result this morning. A good result. Audrey was astonished and delighted. It was an uncontrollable joy, but also an instinctive fear. It was definitely something to be happy about since the mission entrusted by Mr. Fool's adorer had been accomplished so easily. However, the power and actions displayed by Mr. A and the Aurora Order who was backing him left Audrey subconsciously scared. Thankfully, I talked with Glaint yesterday and reached a loan agreement. As a Viscount, he should have successfully raised the money without drawing attention to himself. I'll give Mr. A the remaining funds in the coming 2 days through Zio and Furs. I can't afford to show my face. I won't be attending Mr. A's gathering for the next month or 2. It's good that I already have other circles. Audrey took a reserved bite of the soft bread which was slathered with jam. As breakfast drew to a close, small cakes of cream, cherries, and strawberries were served to her plate, and she suddenly felt a little smug as she calmed down. Mr. Hanged Man wanted to take part in the mission, but he might have only just now completed his initial assignment, but it's already over. Serves him right to be at sea. Audrey was in a good mood, and she was smiling as she savored the dessert. At Hillston Borough, Zio and Furs looked at the newspaper in front of them and made no further movements for a long time. This was done by Mr. A, wasn't it? Zio looked at her friend with a shocked and puzzled look. Furs turned the stone bracelet on her wrist and shook her head in a daze. Perhaps. I know about the Aurora Order, but I don't know if Mr. A is a member of the Aurora Order. He should be. After all, we only gave him £2,000 yesterday. I doubt anyone else would also want to assassinate Ambassador Bakerland, Zio said with uncertainty. Furs was silent for a few seconds before she suddenly sighed and said, whether it was Mr. A or not, we still have to give him the remaining £8,000. At the moment, no one can prove that he didn't do it. If we want to stay in this circle, we can't renege on the debt. Anyway, we're not the ones paying. And we'll still get £500 for the work. With that, Zio became happy. The thing is, I always have a feeling that finding Mr. A again would be dangerous. Furs pondered and said, I'll go by myself to make the last payment. It'll be better for the both of us. But, Zio was a little worried. If you follow me, it'll affect my escape. Furs shook the bracelet on her wrist and said in a disdainful tone. All right then, Zio scratched her short, rough blonde hair as she helplessly replied. While the two of them were fretting about this, a new message from Mr. A came to them from a private communication channel. He told them not to look for him, but to deposit the rest of the money in separate anonymous accounts at different banks. Phew. Zio and Furs breathed a sigh of relief in unison. In a basement that was as wide as a temple, Mr. A, wearing a hooded black robe, was kneeling in the darkness, murmuring something reverently. In front of him was a 3-meter statue of a man hanging upside down with his legs chained up. This hanged man had a giant's unique single vertical eye, and his arms were stretched out horizontally, forming a cross. At this moment, a man with a black robe came in and humbly reported, Mr. A, I've already sent the news. Well done, Mr. A said, without turning his head. The man in the black robe asked curiously, why don't you let us investigate who commissioned this mission? Mr. A lowered his head and said with an indifferent tone, there's no need. You must remember that this is a critical moment. We will cause chaos throughout the continent, try our best to attract the attention of others, and use these to welcome the return of our Lord. Ha ha ha. Cough. 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 Mr. A suddenly laughed before he started having a fit of coughing. It was so serious that he fell to the ground. Cough. Cough. He coughed out blood-colored fragments which continued squirming after falling to the ground as if they were alive. The man in the black robe immediately lowered his head, pretending as though he had seen nothing. After quite some time, Mr. A finally calmed down. He crawled forward, his mouth pressed against the ground as he licked all the blood-colored fragments that he had coughed out back into his mouth. 126 New Year's Street, Hillston Borough. The relaxed Klein didn't tail Daraga Gale this time. Instead, he chose his mistress, Erica Taylor. After all, adultery needed two to clap. The pretty blonde, with the intricate makeup, arrived early at the Quelag Club via a rental carriage. Klein, who carried a suitcase containing a portable camera and all sorts of disguises, followed her in. "Are there any more rooms to rest in?" Wearing the club's frost badge on his chest, he asked the elegant maid responsible for receiving guests today. The maid, wearing a black and white dress, politely smiled. "Yes, please follow the attendant upstairs." Klein nodded slightly. He followed the red-vested attendant up the stairs and arrived at the second floor, just in time to see Erica Taylor enter a lounge that faced the streets. "Do you want to see the passers-by on the street or the tennis court out back?" the red-vested attendant asked politely. "Let's do the street," Klein answered casually in a deliberate manner. Under the arrangements of the red-vested attendant, he and Erica Taylor's room was separated by 2 rooms, and he could also see the street outside the club. "How do I take a picture later? Should I find a chance to sneak in and hide in the room, or climb out of the window and travel across the pipes?" Neither of these methods can conceal that exaggerated flash, but the latter can be disguised as a vogue shot from the outside. "That wouldn't bring suspicion to me and I wouldn't be kicked out. However, this will be easily noticed by Daragu and Erica. Use a charm to put them to sleep." "No, it wouldn't be convincing enough, it has to be a picture of them doing the deed. There's only one chance, and I have to take it well enough. This isn't my field of expertise, as I'm not some artistic master." If it was old Neil, he would definitely attempt to conjure a new ritualistic magic to hide the camera flash. Of course, the goddess might not respond to his request. As Klein considered his next move, he saw the image of Miss Bodyguard appear in a silver mirror in the room. She was still wearing her black Gothic regal dress and her matching soft hat. Her hair was pale blonde in color with delicate features across her pale face. "Do you have any way of hiding the flash of the camera?" Klein asked casually. Before he could finish his sentence, he saw ripples on the surface of the silver mirror as a slightly transparent palm suddenly extended. Miss Bodyguard came out of the silver mirror like a ghost, walked in front of Klein, and said with a nod, "Yes." She lowered her body and leaned over, slowly fusing into the camera's lens. Klein's mouth slightly opened as he watched this horrifying scene, taking quite a while to recover from his shock. He picked up his portable camera and tried a test shot in his lounge. The effect was beyond his expectations. The flash was limited to the vicinity of the camera, and the resulting image was also quite good. "Perhaps it should now be called a spectral camera," Klein lampooned. He took the camera, went to the window, and patiently waited. Not long after, he saw Daraga Gale arrive via carriage. In the other room, Erica Taylor saw her lover and hastily left the lounge to meet him on the first floor. Klein seized the opportunity to use a tarot card to open her room, carefully hiding in the cupboard where the extra sheets and quilts were kept. The darkness around him reminded him of the previous night, of that creepy and terrifying Numblerite master, Rosago. Last night was filled with danger, yet today, here I am catching adulterers in the act. Life sure is marvelous. While Klein was making fun of himself, he heard the door open. Chapter 255, Photography expert huddled in the cupboard, Klein secretly activated his spirit vision and saw 2 interfering auras enter. "Erica, I brought you a present," a deep voice sounded as the door closed. "As expected, he's a gentleman of the Lone Kingdom. Even in an affair, he seems a little old-fashioned." If it was a man from Intis, he would definitely be shouting, "Sweetheart, baby, angel," and the like. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. Of course, this was based on the stereotypes from newspapers, magazines, and novels. Erica Taylor asked in surprise, "Let me guess. Is it Fassman eye cream, face cream, or essence? Or Lashini's? What the heck are all those?" Klein was stunned by what he heard. It was clear that Daraga Gale wasn't able to react in time either. It took him about 8 seconds before he said, "No, stockings." In this world, since oil hasn't been discovered, there were no corresponding cheap chemical products, therefore, silk stockings were considered high-class items. "Not bad, let me take a look." Erica's joy didn't diminish. "I bought them yesterday at Phillips. 1 pair for 30 soli, a total of 5 pairs, Daragu said in a flaunting tone. "How expensive?" "That's expensive." Erica and Klein both said the same thing, one exclaiming, the other secretly sighing. Benson has worked for so many years, earning only £1.10 soli a week, which is 30 soli. That's just equivalent to a pair of stockings, and with that salary, he was able to provide his brother and sister with an education, feed them fairly well, and even provided them with a place to sleep. An average worker with a bit of skill would only be paid around 20 soli a week. Kleins clicked his tongue. "No, it's not expensive. Silk stockings are worth that much. I even gave an extra tip of 5 soli." As he spoke, the color of his aura turned more vivid, and Klein guessed that he had taken off his coat. "Then I'll give it a try," Erica Taylor softly said in a suggestive manner. "I feel like I'm watching a porno again. And it's even a live broadcast. Besides, Miss Bodyguard is also here." The corner of Klein's mouth twitched as he watched red colors flowing across red colors, signifying the passion between the two was igniting like fire. The purple color is almost red and isn't stopping. Red wrapped around green, orange. While listening to the wheezing and the low laughter, Klein judged the movements and positions of the couple outside by the change in the color of their auras. Feeling that this was enough, Klein silently pushed open the cupboard door and looked in the direction of the bed. Daragu and Erica were already entangled, their clothes half undone, their movements intense. Klein lifted the spectral camera and aimed it at the passionate couple, waiting to see their faces at the same time. As Daragu and Erica fell back onto the bed, Klein finally captured the most appropriate frame and pressed the shutter button. The click of the camera wasn't distinct, and the intense flash and other abnormalities were limited to a very small area, so the couple wasn't alarmed. With no confidence in his photography skills, Klein added a few more shots, intending to have options to choose from later. He was only planning on handing his employer a single picture because too many photos would make the lawyer suspect why the couple didn't notice him taking the picture. A piece of underwear landed lightly on the floor, and the sound of breathing intensified as Klein grabbed his portable camera and adeptly rolled out of the cupboard, closing the door behind him. He rolled on the floor until he reached the lounge's door. Then, he quietly pulled it open and returned to the corridor. Done. With a sigh of relief, Klein politely closed the door in silence, pressed his hand to his chest, and bowed in the direction of the bed. Without further ado, he returned to his lounge. "The last £7 will soon be obtained. And I also earned an additional Quelag Club membership worth £50. It covers board, lodging, and entertainment. That's worth even more than £50. Without any connections or contacts, I wouldn't have been able to join this, even with £100. This mission isn't bad at all. It's simple, safe, and profitable." Klein put down his portable camera and sighed with emotion in his heart. At that moment, a hand suddenly stretched out from the camera lens. Miss Bodyguard in her black regal dress slowly came out and floated in midair again, but her face remained pale. Thinking of how he had led her to watch some porno, Klein tried to change the topic, in embarrassment. "I plan on heading to the cafeteria to eat something. Do you want to come with me? Each member could bring one guest." As for how to explain the sudden appearance of the guest, Klein's plan was to go out for a while and then come back. Miss Bodyguard replied in a neutral tone, "I can go without eating for 2 weeks." As she spoke, she turned her back to Klein and floated toward the mirror, disappearing in an instant. What exactly is her sequence? Klein thought curiously, putting the portable camera back in its case. After doing all of this, he went to the bathroom and relieved himself. After washing his hands and wiping his face, Klein looked into the mirror and examined his appearance. As he hadn't shaved this morning, he had quite a stubble. His hair was parted to the sides in a 3:7 ratio, and a pair of gold-rimmed glasses hung on his face. He looked refined and scholarly, with a tinge of maturity. There's a definite difference from the past. I can still be recognized if scrutinized. Once my beard grows to a certain extent, I wouldn't have to worry that much. I wouldn't need to be afraid of anything when I advance to sequence 6 faceless. Klein took out his golden pocket watch, opened it, and walked out of the bathroom. He took his suitcase and went to the cafeteria on the first floor. It was just after 9, so breakfast was still served. Klein chose a double-sided, half-cooked fried egg, a loaf of white bread, a cake of butter, a desi pie, a serving of bacon, and a cup of Marquis black tea with a piece of lemon floating on its surface. While looking for a seat, he suddenly saw a familiar face. It was the surgeon who had recommended him to the club, Aaron Series. The tall, thin gentleman was sitting alone in the corner, having finished his breakfast and was sipping his coffee as he leafed through the newspaper. "Good morning, Dr. Series." Klein walked over and greeted the slightly cold Aaron. The surgeon nudged the frame over his nose and said, "Just call me Aaron, Detective Moriarty. According to the principle of reciprocity, you have to call me Sherlock." Klein sat down. "Any news today?" "I came out in such a hurry that I haven't read the newspapers. The Intis ambassador was assassinated. A terrorist organization by the name of the Aurora Order declared responsibility for it. Sigh, this world is becoming more and more chaotic. Sooner or later, there will be an all-out war in the southern and northern continent." Aaron expressed his feelings. "The war has never stopped, sir, it's just that we've been able to enjoy peace." Klein finished his fried egg and replied with a smile. "What a pity that such an important case wouldn't seek the help of private detectives like us." Aaron flipped through the newspaper. "This news doesn't have much to do with us. What's really important is that the House of Lords and the House of Commons will pass a motion either today or tomorrow after a long debate. First, it's the Civil Servant Unified Examination Bill, as well as the relevant guidance and actual plans. Second, is the establishment of the Atmospheric Pollution Council, and third, the establishment of the Independent Alkaline Industry Inspector. The latter two involve pollution. God, they're finally paying attention to this problem. The patients in the hospital with pulmonary attacks have been rising constantly. Has it finally been passed? I wonder how Benson's preparations are. Will it be affected by my death?" Klein's smile suddenly beamed. "That's good news. To Mary, this is extremely good news. She wishes to make herself or her husband, Duragu, become one of the members of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. She has a higher chance since she doesn't hold any positions in a commercial company and is a devotee of the goddess. Besides, in any organization, there's ultimately a need for balance." Aaron mentioned Klein's employer. "I suggested to her that she should frequent the club since we have quite a number of House of Commons members of Parliament as club members. In the Lone Kingdom, the members of Parliament of the House of Commons were mainly composed of wealthy people and the representatives of certain nobles. However, there were also many professionals, such as doctors, lawyers, priests, teachers, scientists, and accountants. The Quelag Club targeted a variety of professionals in the middle class, without distinguishing between them by their political inclinations. Klein didn't know much about such things, so he just said a few words in response before changing the subject. "Aaron, it's Friday today. Don't you need to head back to the hospital?" No, I'm on leave. It's been terrible lately. Aaron suddenly frowned. What happened? Klein drank a mouthful of black tea. Since Bakerland had just been assassinated, and Rosego's body had been thrown into a sewer far away, he didn't know when it would be found. Klein was concerned about the after effects and the imperfection of his disguise, so he didn't plan on taking missions that were too difficult or easily exposed his identity. Therefore, he was interested in simple matters which held potential and handsome rewards. Aaron put down the newspaper and sighed. I've been very unlucky recently. I've had a few consecutive failed surgeries. Fortunately, there were no serious consequences. Otherwise, my license would have been revoked. Although it wasn't big news for surgeons to cause deaths in the present era since it was common, the penalties were still quite severe if a serious accident occurred due to a surgeon's negligence. Well, I can't help much. Well, actually, I know of a luck enhancement ritual, but its effect is to send you above a gray fog. Klein lowered his head and began to nibble at his bread. After breakfast, he said goodbye to Aaron, went to withdraw £500 in cash, and gave £300 to Miss Bodyguard before returning home. While waiting for the photos to develop, he hoped for a simple job to be entrusted to him. Unfortunately, none of them came to him. In the evening, Klein prepared to head out again, his target, Braveheart's bar. Taking the opportunity of having Miss Bodyguard around, he hoped to get in touch with more Beyonder circles. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.